Hello everyone and welcome back to another Stradigo video. This is Jonas and Ryan today with another index review. This time it's Seraphon, and if you love Seraphon, you're gonna get very excited right now because we have a very special guest for this review. It's Caleb Hastings from the Caleb Hastings YouTube channel. If you don't know who he is, definitely go check out his content. He makes completely dedicated Seraphon content, right, Caleb?
That's right.
Yep.
Howdy, y'all. This is Caleb, and I am excited to be here to talk some Seraphon. Any excuse to talk about the best army in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I'm always here for it.
Yeah. I was just telling Caleb before you arrived, Ryan, that he's partially the reason why I have a Seraphon army. Before I actually dedicated some resources to building one, I googled some stuff just to see whether I would like the atmosphere, I suppose I'll call it, of the Seraphon player base. And with social media being the thing that it is, it's very important to me to have some content that I can watch or listen to get hyped. And Caleb's stuff has been really amazing for that. So thank you so much,
awesome.
Caleb, for doing the work.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
Okay, so guys, if you haven't checked out one of our index review videos so far, we usually follow the same pattern, so we'll cover all of the battle traits. That also includes the enhancements, so spells, heroic traits, and so on. Then we'll pick out 6 Warscrolls that we'll break down. And by break down, we most often mean we look at some stats, we look at how good they are. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Warscrolls that we've selected are actually the ones that you should bring. Sometimes there's also a Warscroll included that we want to talk about because it went through some big changes, for example, but we're not going to cover all of the stuff. Caleb, you've done a complete Warscroll review, right?
Yep. We went through all the different Warscrolls, the entire index. If you want a breakdown of everything,
yeah,
we've got that there. So yeah.
But if I recall, from seeing your videos, you've changed your opinion on quite a lot of Warscrolls so far, right?
Yeah, when the book first comes out, you think, oh, this is going to be the best thing in the army. And as you kind of get it on the table and play it, usually your opinions start to change the more games you get in.
Yeah, that's actually one of the big reasons why I really wanted to include your opinion here in this video, because just as is the case with you, I have the same feeling with Lumineth, right? I did this entire breakdown of the index of the Warscrolls with Siegfried, one of our Lumineth channel members, and I could redo it completely and change maybe a third of my opinions that I spoke about. So that's why it's very interesting to have you here. After the Warscroll breakdown, we'll move on to lists. We've got 3 lists for you guys, and then we'll just close out with some conclusions, some final thoughts, and so on. Is there anything you guys want to mention before we move on?
I guess I'll just mention that I am definitely the non-Seraphon player here. It's the only order army I don't have really any of. But, I'm going to be throwing my 2 cents in on some math stuff. And I'm really happy to be here to be doing the collab with Caleb. So, and Jonas, you're outnumbered by Americans now. So how do you feel?
Like most Europeans. We're used to it by now.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
I remember, Ryan, you being amazed at how much American songs that I was playing last time you were here.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, I think you guys underestimate how much of European culture is influenced by America at this point in history. Like almost all of our television stuff and music stuff is all from the US. So
yeah, you're not only outnumbered by Americans, you're outnumbered by Southern Americans at this point too, as in like people from the South. Caleb, I don't know if Jonas told you, but I'm from Atlanta, so
okay.
So we're teaming up even harder on that. We got to put some country music on or something.
Get you a cowboy hat.
Yeah, where are you from in Texas?
Dallas Fort Worth area.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's all I got, Jonas. Go ahead and let's get into the action.
Let's get into it. So battle traits. Man, I remember doing the faction focus previews with you, Ryan, and I was so disappointed with the crate plan because it's so very basic. But I've come to love it in a certain way or shape or form, I guess. So with the crate plan, what actually happens, right? You can see that we've got on the page here, we've got 2 battle round abilities or deployment phase abilities, I suppose. And then on the right here, we've got 4 asterisms. If you play Lumineth, you can kind of see a pattern here where you select something and it's applied to your entire army. The main difference being that with Seraphon, the Great Plan, as it's called, you select your Great Plan in the deployment phase. Now, keep in mind when you do so, that actually happens after you've done your faction terrain deployment and your army deployment, also for your opponents. So that means that you actually get to not only see your opponent's army, but also see his deployment and yours before you choose your Great Plan. It kind of happens in tandem with your Honor Guard abilities. Depending on who goes first, you kind of pop those in a row, I suppose. But that's kind of neat, right? And once you select your Great Plan, you get to choose one of the asterisms, and it's applied to your entire army for the entirety of the game. Pretty neat. Caleb, you being the main Seraphon player here, how's this ability been turning out for you?
I like anytime they give me the ability to pick something that's going to buff my army when I'm there at the table. So a lot of these you can kind of build your list into with the mindset of, I'm going to use this one probably unless the table, state looks a certain way, then I'm going to flex into something else. So I think there is a little bit of flexibility here, tactical flexibility, that allows you to kind of pick and choose which one you want to do based on what the battle plan is, the army you're facing, and what your list is. So it is nice. I like it. I think there's a couple that generally are my default that I lean into, but they all have a place in the army. So I think if you focus on one of those in your list building and pick it at deployment, it's going to be good for you. So.
Yeah, would you say that you have to focus on it when you're already list building, or is it usually fine to just put together a good list and then see what fits?
I think most of our units will kind of fall into some of these. So, but also the battle plan. So I think especially the one where you're at -1 to rend in your territory. This one a lot of times depends on what the deployment and the territories look like.
Yep, that's in the notes. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great that you picked that out. We'll get into all of the asterisms separately, and we'll also discuss which ones you default to, because I've got 2 defaults as well. Ryan, you and I have both shared our opinion on these things so far, and you not being a Seraphon player, I'm not gonna ask you every time what you think about it, but please chime in if you've got something to add. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So before we look at the other ability below it there, further the Great Plan, let's look at the asterisms first. So first of all, we've got Itzel the Tamer. It's a passive ability that's triggered in the combat phase. Companion weapons used by friendly Seraphon units have crit 2 hits. Well, it's the combat phase color. I just have to clarify. It doesn't necessarily mean that it only triggers in the combat phase, but for Seraphon, I don't think there are... the Troglodon has the companion weapon, right? With the range attack?
And Bastillodon does too, but Bastillodon also already crit hits, so it wouldn't.
Okay, so it would actually trigger on the Troglodon, I guess.
Yeah.
So companion weapons have crit 2 hits, which is pretty neat because there are so very little ways in the game to affect companion weapons. And as an army that's greatly reliant on the damage from companion weapons, this is really your damage buff thing that you've got. Some stuff that I wrote down in the notes here. Crit 2 hits, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the maths guy, roughly translates to +1 to hits. Is that correct?
It not only roughly, it literally mathematically is the same. The thing that it does differently is that you can stack them. So instead of getting +2 to hit, in which functionally means ignoring 1 point of -1 to hit at best, this actually lets you functionally get +2 to hit. So if you do +1 to hit the normal way with, say, all out attack, and then you have crit 2 hits, you go from, say, like a 4 to hit to a 2 to hit mathematically. Okay. So it is swingier That is the one difference. If I want to get to in terms of variance. So, but in terms of expected value, it's the same. So,
yeah, Caleb, what are you thinking about Itzel?
This one, at first glance, you're like, oh, I'm gonna take this with all the monsters. This is the monster asters I'm using. But really, I mean, and it helps there, it does. But really, this is for your Agrodons, your Raptidons.
Yes.
This, because they have quantity of attacks.
Exactly.
And so that's where you're looking to roll those extra 6s to get extra hits. And so companion is one of the worst keywords you can have in the game right now, because you can't really buff it very well. And so we do have one of the unique ways to buff our companion weapons. So if you're leaning into a lot of cavalry, which cavalry is really good right now, this is a good asterism for you.
This used on Raptidon Chargers, a unit of 10. Wow, amazing, really, really good. And as you mentioned, Ryan, if you add +1 to hit on top of that, that's a very hard-hitting unit. So it's all good grades so far. Moving on to Quetzal then. Quetzal the Preserver. This is most akin to an ability that we had in the 3rd edition book. Subtract 1 from the rend characteristic of melee weapons for attacks that target friendly Seraphon units that are wholly within friendly territory. Just want to point out here once again, it's only versus melee weapons, and it's only if your Seraphon units are wholly within your territory. And as you mentioned, Caleb, so far out of the 12 battle plans that we've got in the GHB 24-25, 9 of them are half the table when it comes to friendly territory. So that's kind of pretty forgiving, I suppose. I've not really massively enjoyed this one, even though it looks very strong on paper. Have you used this a whole bunch?
I have used this quite a bit.
Okay.
If I win the priority and I don't have an alpha strike that I'm going to do, or I don't see an opening, I'm going to let them come to me. Then I'll flex into this one because subtracting 1 to rend doesn't, on the surface, it doesn't sound that great. But if you rephrase it as your +1 to hit, which is essentially what it is, that seems like a great buff. But you can also add +1 to hit to this, so you can subtract -1 to rend. You can still do all-out defense. And now your units become quite tough to kill.
Yeah, +1 to hit and +1 to save, right?
Or +1 to save. I'm sorry. Yeah, +1 to save. So, so you can end up doing some being pretty tanky. Now, our units aren't the toughest units in the game anymore. They used to be with the -1 to damage. But this does help. It does sometimes force you to kind of play a little oddly, where if you're on one of these battle plans that has kind of a a stair-stepped deployment zone, kind of an odd shaped deployment zone. I've played where I'm running my guys in these weird formations to keep them wholly in my territory, to keep this buff going. But it is strong, especially if you're going to get alpha striked. This is a great one to put on your army, and it helps you stay alive a little bit longer.
Yeah. I think I would be more inclined to take this one as, for the great plan, so as my first pick, if it also affected ranged weapons. Yeah. And maybe if that's obviously my play style, but I play so much cavalry in Seraphon. That's what attracted me to the army the most anyway. So I don't actually get to use this very often.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're playing like a hard and fast list, then this one won't be as relevant.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a hard and fast list, this one might actually be very relevant in that case. Sotek the Deliverer. So it actually doesn't deliver any packages or something, but it delivers your movement units to the front lines if you want to, because it adds 2 to the move characteristic of all friendly Seraphon units. I think if you don't play a lot of Warhammer, this seems pretty weak. But I think all, the 3 of us are super excited by just having 2 inch on your entire army, right? Ryan, was it your opinion in the faction focus that said if it was just this as a battle trait, I would be happy?
Yep, I was a big stand for this. I think a lot of times when you're playing a lot of armies and you see a whole new set of new rules come out, you think about, if I had this for one of any of my armies, would I be excited about it? And sometimes I forget what the saying is, but something about riches. but where you're spoiled for whatever. You have too many good things going on, so you can't see how great something is. But I think adding +2 to, let's put it this way. I'm playing OBR right now, and one of the movement tricks you can do for only a 12-inch bubble for whoever happens to be in that is +2-inch movement. And you have to give up a different ability to be able to do that. Not that they usually overlap, but the fact that your whole army, especially an army that's very cavalry oriented sometimes, gets to get this just flat, I feel is a great ability. Yeah. So I'm Caleb. I don't know. What's your take on the +2 to move?
This is my default pick. Sotek Deliver is my default because movement wins games. Being able to control the board, get onto the objectives that you need to, hit the units that you need to hit, movement is going to help every single time. So it also stacks with some of the other things that we have, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But
we'll talk about it now if you want to, because I added it to the notes. So go ahead.
There you go. Oh, yeah, there you go. So movement in Seraphon is one of its probably best abilities because we have some fast stuff, we have some access to extra movement shenanigans, and so this really helps play into that. Beastmaster there, that's one of our traits there, and it allows us to get another +2 to move to some units, and now your cavalry are going 14 inches or 16 inches if you need them to, and running and charging. It's just becomes really fast. We can easily alpha strike the opponent on turn 1.
Yeah. And keep in mind that a lot of cav that used to have 14 or even 16, like in Zinj, movement characteristics, they've been kind of pulled back. There are very few that have 14 natively anymore. So that's pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, if you see an opening and your opponent is not used to playing against Seraphon, and you maybe have let's say a unit of 10 Raptidon Chargers, maybe even with the +1 to hit, +1 to wound from priority targets, you've got the +2 to move from Sotek, you've got the +2 to move from Beastmaster, then the D6 move in your shooting phase from Shadow Strike Starhost, and then the run and charge from Speed of Wanshe. Man. That's a 16 plus 2d6 move, and you still get the charge.
Yeah.
Crazy. Really, really good. Okay, and then on to Teapot the Seer. I was super stoked about this one when we first did the review. It seemed really, really strong. Now, keep in mind, I come from a Lumineth background, obviously, so getting +1 to casting rolls just attracts me from the get-go. But I have to be honest, I've almost never picked this one in any of my Seraphon battles. How are you feeling about this one, Caleb?
It's the easiest one to get further the great plan on the left side, which we'll talk about in a second. It is the easiest one for that. So if you're looking to combo some of these up, that one is easy. Most lists will have a Slann in it, not all of them, but a lot of them will. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to get the secondary for this one, but it doesn't seem as impactful. I think part of it is because our spell lore, I don't have anything that's absolutely critical to the army to get spells off with.
Yeah,
it does help with all the endless spells that you're gonna be casting, or if you're going with a incarnate or something, it will help there. But it just doesn't seem as impactful as the rest of them. At first, I thought this was gonna be huge if we were a magic heavy army again, where we're taking multiple casters, doing all that kind of stuff, but we're not. So not as impactful as the other ones.
Yeah, I'm on the exact same wavelength. +1 to casting is so good. I made a specific video about Places of Power because I wanted to showcase how impactful places of +1 to casting could be. And I still think it's very strong. It's just that our spells aren't as necessary to get our army to function well. I think the only spell that I really, really feel like I benefit greatly from is Speed of Wanshe. And even then, it's like I could do without it in most cases.
Question for you guys: if this said +1 to unbind, would you be more excited about it?
I would.
Yeah, I think so, because there's not a whole lot of pluses to unbind in Age of Sigmar right now. So that one would, and with our board wide unbinds from Slann, that would be quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, just got to keep in mind that we already get a lot of bonuses on our Slann anyway. So you would do this for the Skink Wizards. But then how many Skink Wizards are you actually running? Probably only the Starseer or something for 2 casts. And Yeah, I mean, it's cool, but compared to the other ones, it's not as flashy and usually not as necessary.
Yeah, and that brings me kind of to another point that I've been noticing and trying to I don't know, play games with some of my more worlds competitive oriented friends, but there are very few armies that are running more than 2 drops right now. So definitely more than 3, which means almost implicitly you don't have enough heroes that are actually getting this. If you had 5 casters, you'd be like, oh, that's great. Functionally, I'm getting the most efficiency out of this ability. But if you've only got 1 or 2, I feel like the kind of I guess power. What's the term that we
Power
use for
level?
that? No, yeah, but like where we're kind of we're scaling everything up. I forget what the word we use. It's like power pairs, but on a different term. In any case, it's just not having as big of an impact as say any of the other abilities that we saw, especially +2 to move.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This ability, I do think, is kind of waned a bit. At least if you're trying to keep low drops.
Yeah, I mean, even it doesn't for Seraphon specifically. It doesn't matter as much that you only get to run 2 heroes, because if you're running a Slan in the Starseer, that's 5 casts that you're getting. That's a whole lot. So it actually has a lot of value even for the 2 wizards, but even then, it's not as impressive. Okay, let's look at further grade plans. So by now you've selected one of the asterisms that's been applied to your entire army, and then we get to the start of the 3rd battle round. This could either be your turn or your opponent's. It doesn't actually matter. And then you get to check, depending on which asterism you chose, whether you've completed a side mission, I guess. For example, if you've picked Itzel Tamer at the start of your battle, if you then already destroyed 3 or more enemy units, you get the completion from Itzel Tamer, and then you get to choose a different asterism ability. So I saw some confusion there on the internet. Just to clarify here, this is the order of further grade plan, right? Or just the grade plan as a whole. So in the deployment phase, you choose 1 asterism. That's your grade plan. Then you apply the asterism to your entire army. Start of the 3rd battle round, you check whether you met the conditions for that asterism. And if the conditions are met, then you add a new asterism to the grade plan. You obviously can't choose the one that you've already chosen, so you get to choose out of the 3 other ones that are still left. So people kind of mix this up a little bit, and they interpret it as if you did one of those 4 conditions, you actually got to choose that asterism. But it's I think the way it's working now is much better. Caleb, before I share my opinion, how are you feeling about these conditions here?
In casual games, this is pretty fun. Because there is this kind of extra quest that you're going for. And so I really like it there. In competitive games, I feel that this is almost never relevant, because I'm going to inform my opponent, hey, at the start of the 3rd turn, if X, Y, and Z, then I'll get an extra buff. So they are going to prevent that. In general, they're going to prevent that. If I'm doing Sotek the Deliverer, they're going to keep their general safe, or their general is somebody who they want in combat anyway, and it's going to be a beat stick that I probably don't want to pull in.
Yeah. Or they maybe use power through if it's a beat stick, so they usually have more wounds and so on. Yeah.
There are some tricks specifically for that one. If you are on Sotek the Deliverer, if you do take a Sunclaw battle formation, you can get a pile-in to pull in a general. I've done that before to get this. But Quetzal the Preserver, if you're pick that asterism, this one is, I have never gotten this before. I have never gotten the 3rd one. Because in general, the opponent's going to have some unit they can sacrifice to send back to keep me from getting a different asterism. Itzel the Tamer is pretty easy to get. You're going to be killing 3 units generally in turns 1 and 2, but that's the weaker of the first picks that you would take. But if you are running a lot of cavalry and you have enough range to get where you need to go, maybe you can flex into that one, and then pick Sotek the Deliverer after that for the extra movement for the end game where you're trying to score objectives and stuff. So The easiest one by far is Topek the Seer. Keep your Slan alive. He's still going to be alive if you have a chance of winning the game at the start of the third battle round. And so, if you do want two in your list, that one is usually the easiest one to accomplish.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to a different point that you don't want to force yourself to meet these conditions, if that means that you're actually worse off, right? I can imagine people getting really tunnel visioned by this and thinking, I need to select my second asterism. But sometimes it's totally fine to just play with one asterism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would always go for the asterisms that you feel works best for the entirety of the game, rather than picking one that's gonna be weak for turn 1 and 2, just so you get the second one on your third round.
Absolutely. Yeah, and none of the asterisms are so good that it's going to, determine the game. So really, this is just kind of a cherry on the top. If you get one of these, congratulations, you get an extra bonus here, and they're helpful. Don't get me wrong, but don't overextend yourself in an effort to get one of these where you might end up losing the game.
Mm-hmm. I think the conditions for Teapot this year, as you mentioned, are the easiest, and I also feel like they are fitting for the playstyle that you might execute at that point. But Quetzal the Preserver is just flat out weird to me. Like, they want you to stay in your own territory completely because you need that buff for the first and second battle round, and then if you want to get your second asterism, you can't have any enemy units wholly within your territory, while you're kind of encouraging them to come to your territory anyway because you were Quetzaled up, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really weird. I don't like it at all. I really don't like that one. Sotek, as you mentioned, it's so and so. Sometimes you get it, but Itzel is kind of fitting. But then in the first and second battle round, if you're going out of your way to kill 3 or more enemy units, the battle's either already going very well for you or pretty bad. So, though I have to mention that I was surprised after I played a couple of games how often actually it happens that you've already killed, or that 3 enemy units have already been destroyed by round 3. It's really not something that I keep in mind when I'm playing different armies, and Seraphon really made me aware of that. Anyway, Ryan, is there anything you want to mention before we move on to the enhancements?
No, what you guys just said about not shooting yourself in the foot by chasing this thing, chasing the dragon here, I think is a good point.
Yeah. So that's basically what's in the notes. Before we actually move on to enhancements, I did promise that we would talk about which ones are our favorites. Caleb, I'll let you get... okay. I animated them perfectly. And I only remember now. There you go. So, Caleb, which ones do you like the best?
My favorite one is Sotek the Deliverer. The extra movement is just so good, especially if you're trying to get your cavalry into combat turn 1, or if they're playing KG, or you need to grab objectives. Just movement helps so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am completely in the same boat. I would always pick Sotek probably because it's the only one that I feel will let me win the game at any point. As in, it could already decide it for me in the first or second turn, or maybe only in the last turn, but it's gonna have an impact on me winning the game at some point. Whereas with all the other ones, Quetzal I might not get off at any point. Teapot I might actually not need if I roll well enough. So it's all a little bit iffy, I guess. I really like Itzel, but then it really makes me play very corny, as in blood for the blood god vibes. I see red before my eyes and just rush my Agrodons in, and they cannot take a hit as much as I thought they would be able to.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Ryan, you as a non-Seraphon player, is there any asterism that you would be inclined to take if it's not Sotek? Because I know that you love the 2-inch to your movement.
I mean, the companion weapons is fun if you really lean that way. I don't love the -1 rend unless you're castling up, and this army isn't really a shooting army, so
Nope.
that's the kind of place where you would castle up. I know they used to do a lot more mortal damage from afar, so that would have been the case for that. So I guess if I had to pick, I'd go either companion. I guess companions. Just I'd lean into the heavy cav. But no, I think +2 to move is just the way to go.
Yeah. Okay. Glad we agree. On to the battle formations then before we get to the enhancements. So we've got 4 battle formations: the Eternal Star Host, the Shadow Strike Star Host, the Sunclaw Star Host, and then the Thunderquake Star Host. I make that one sound a little bit more impressive because it's the least impressive of the 4, maybe. Depends on how you feel about the Eternal Star Host, I guess. Right, let's look at them all separately. So first of all, the Eternal Star Host. If you've enjoyed playing a Croak list in 3rd edition, and you love bringing your bridge maybe, and you loved teleporting because that's something that you got to do, well, you could somehow sort of do that still with Eternal Star Host. So once per turn for your army in your movement phase only, which is a bummer, you pick a friendly Seraphon unit wholly within 12 inches of a friendly Seraphon wizard to use this ability. You roll a dice, and on a 3+, remove that unit from battlefield and set it up again on a battlefield more than 9 inches from all enemy units. So on the surface, this might actually seem very appealing. I was very drawn to this because I just love teleporting stuff. But there are some caveats that I want to clarify before we get into the analysis even further here. Not only do you have to be wholly within 12 inches of a Seraphon wizard, which might happen in the first couple of turns, but I think from round 3 onwards is going to be way more difficult. But then you also have to roll a 3-up. And then keep in mind, if you fail that 3-up, you've actually still used this ability, which is a core ability, which means that if you use this core ability on one of your units, that unit actually doesn't get to move anymore because just moving normally is also a core ability. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think it works this way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's really a bummer. I think if they got rid of the core keyword, I might still be inclined to use this ability, but it's just too risky. Not only do you want to use this on a unit that you really wanted to teleport, but then if you fail at teleport, you're stuck. Man, that's really rough. Undeservedly so.
This was one of those ones when I first looked at the battle tome. I was thinking, yes, I can teleport Saurus things now, just like the old days. But the more you look at it, yeah, just like you explained just now, I don't think it's a very good ability anymore. It's a formation. To be honest, I haven't played it all because just not enough reward here for the risk of rolling that and having to sit still and too many restrictions and yeah, not for me.
And if you're thinking like I'm gonna use this in the Croak playstyle and just risk it to get a biscuit, keep in mind this happens after the hero phase, so you can't teleport your wizards forwards to get into spell slinging range. They actually already have to be, and the only way that you would still get mileage out of this is if you teleported them back in that case. But if you're stuck there, well, good luck.
Yeah.
It's a real bummer. I really don't enjoy abilities that actually should be beneficial to you, but might actually make you lose the game more often than win you the game. Not getting a teleport off. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, would this have been a broken faction or formation if there was no dice roll? You just did it. No, it still would have been fine. It still would have been a pretty restrictive. And maybe it would be playable there, but we have this dice roll that means your entire battle formation is going to be useless 1/3 of the time.
Yeah, and it's not only useless, but it's actually gonna debuff you in a way.
Yeah.
That's what's bothering me the most, I think. It almost feels a little bit like the Slanesh Legion's abilities, where you really have to decide whether it's worth the risk, right? You know?
Yeah.
And usually it isn't, I think.
No.
Ryan, anything to add?
Yeah, that's the first time I've read that or realized that was the problem.
Yep.
Yeah, if it said that if it doesn't go off, you still can move, it'd be fine, right? Like, it's still in a 3-up, and keep in mind, the most important battle tactic for teleporting doesn't allow you to teleport. So it's not really giving up the take the flanks, right? It would be maybe giving up the I forget the name of the battle type, but taking their territory, take their land or whatever. But yeah, the fact that you can't move is brutal. I mean, like, the first thing that came to mind was like maybe a unit that doesn't mind staying put, like a bodyguard type unit. You're like, well, maybe I'll teleport this unit. If it doesn't work, at least they're still doing their job, sticking around.
Yeah.
But the other formations are probably better. I haven't taken a quick look at them again in a while, but I have a feeling this is not the one to go for, right?
Yeah, I think I would be okay with this major trade-off if it didn't have a range. Especially since it's called Celestial Translocation. I just imagine someone in a space pyramid pulling away a unit and then dropping them somewhere. That would be flavorful, and it would be like a little bit worth the risk, I suppose, because it would just get you to teleport all over the board potentially. But now,
yeah. And what unit am I going to want to do this with? I've got nothing that's going to drop down to do a bunch of shooting outside of 9. I've got nothing that not really any pluses to charge in the army. So I don't even know what unit I would be teleporting with.
Yeah.
What if it said outside of 7? Then you're running a real Skaven-y kind of proposition where you're like, well,
that's cool.
I might get that charge.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I think I would like that.
Yeah. I would probably still not risk it, but especially because Hunters of Huanche are a thing, but we will get to that in the Warscroll breakdown.
Yeah.
Let's look at one of my favorite ones personally, is the Shadow Strike Star Host. So it's also once per turn army and only in your shooting phase. But it's actually quite generous, especially compared to Eternal Star Host. So you get to pick up to 3 friendly skink infantry or skink cavalry units that are not in combat to be the targets. I summed up all the skink units in the notes on the left here. And the effect is if each target can move d6 inches, each target cannot move into combat during any part of that move. Keep in mind, though, there are no other restrictions at all. No keywords, no shooting, no charging, and nothing like that. So it's just you get a free run, basically, and it doesn't even count as a run. Amazing.
Yeah. You look at this one and the previous one, are these written by the same people? How there's no restrictions on this one. Yeah. You can pick 3 units. They can be anywhere on the board as long as they're not in combat. This is very good. If you're running skink cavalry, this becomes very good, especially with the Raptidons. It also helps with a lot of skink infantry, like your Hunters of Huanche, if you're running screens of skinks, or even some of the heroes have skink infantry keywords. So D6 is quite variable, but any extra movement will always help. So this one's cool.
Yeah,
and it happens in your shooting phase, so a very interesting place for some extra movement.
Yes. Yeah, it's really, really strong. There are so many ways that you can apply this to your benefit. As you mentioned, Caleb, if you're running the Raptidon Chargers, this is basically a free D6 inch that you get to close in on your opponents. But you could also use it on the Raptidon Hunters. Not that you're probably going to run those, but if you did, you could actually move into range with their darts and then move back D6 inches. Another application that I can see is, since your opponent gets to do covering fire at the end of your shooting phase, you could actually use a D6 to maneuver units closer or to a point where you can get to decide what unit your opponent gets to target with covering fire. And then the most nasty one of all of them, since it doesn't have the move keyword, if you dropped in Hunters of Huanche 9 inches away from anything with their teleport ability, they actually get to move D6 inches in the turn that they came in.
Mm-hmm. So here's my favorite trick with this, and it's taking Kroxagor Warspawn, which get a bonus to their damage if a skink unit is in combat within 12 inches of them. So one of my favorite things is to keep some Hunters of Huanche in reserve until my Warspawn are going to be attacking a target. drop the Hunters of Huanche 9 inches away from that target, move them D6, and then charge them. They're not great in combat, but that doesn't matter because the Kroxigor Warspawn are great in combat. So
they're gonna tear them a new one.
yeah. So it's just kind of a on point delivery of +1 damage for the Kroxigor. So it's a great little ability there. This just opens up a lot of tactical flexibility here with extra movement. So very good.
And the fact that so many skink units are good, or at least very playable, just is a cherry on top, right? This would be amazing for average skink units, but the fact that you want to include so many skink units in your armies right now, except for actual skinks.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Okay, let's move on to the other one that I tend to like if you're more inclined to bring Saurus or Kroxigor. So you've got the Sunclaw Star Host. Also, once per turn army, you get to see a returning theme here. At the end of any turn, though, so not only your end of turn, you pick up to 3 friendly Saurus or Kroxigor units that are in combat to be the target. And for each target, you make a pile-in move, so up to 3 inches towards the closest, towards a unit. But you can't go further from your closest unit than you were before. And then you pick an enemy unit in combat with the target and roll d3 on a 2+. So that's on a d6, that's a roll of a 3 or a 4. Keep that in mind. Inflict an amount of mortal damage on that enemy equal to the roll. So that's a little bit like bite rolls from 3rd edition, I guess. But the pile-in move is actually what excites me the most. Caleb, you were talking about this one when you were talking about the Sotek the Deliverer condition to get your enemy general in combat.
Yep. It's a nice one. If you're going heavy Kroxigor and Agrodons or Warriors or Source Guard or whatever, you're going the Source side of things, yeah. Even the Source, like Carnosaurs, if you're playing just a fun list and you're going Carnosaurs, this will work for Carnosaurs too. So it is nice. Getting the extra pile-in, getting the mortal wounds. There is some fun stuff you can do there. You can grab objectives with that pile-in. You can finish off that last unit that you had down to 1 wound and couldn't quite finish it off. This is where you can do some mortal wounds. And there's no restriction on like picking different units. So I've had it where I've had multiple units in combat with the same enemy unit, and I'm able to do multiple instances of this on that same unit. So it's good. If this is the one you're going to pick if you don't have a lot of skink stuff in your army, this is the one that you're going to pick because it's gives you that extra movement that you need there at the end, and it happens in my turn and your turn.
Yep.
So it does happen in both. Pretty nice, especially because a lot of these things you want them to stay in combat. Agrodons, you want them constantly in combat. And this is a pile-in that's safe from any, hit back. So this happens at the end of the turn. So you can pile into something and they don't have a chance to swing back at you. Where a lot of extra pile-ins happen like in the combat phase, you would get an extra pile-in or something, they'd have a chance to fight you. This one, there's no chance for that.
Yeah, and if you use Power Through with any of your units, you could actually move out of combat with Power Through and then still make that pile-in. Oh no, they have to be in combat, right? There you go.
Yeah. I think you could do this and then power through.
Yeah.
Orion, so
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking a bit about so I've been playing a good chunk of Ideneth, a good bit of Ideneth at the beginning of the edition, and Morsar Guard need to have charged in order to actually be good in combat. And I'm looking through some of the Warscrolls, and there are a number of Saurus units that need to have charged. And so the thing I'm thinking about here is obviously they're stuck in combat, otherwise they're not using this ability. But maybe the one because they'd rather have deleted a whole unit so that they can continue to keep charging things. But maybe this is kind of a Hail Mary if they happen to finish off that unit just in time to be free to charge the next turn. That's kind of the best situation for them. The pile-in's cool, I guess, but I would much rather just be out of combat. If this said I got to make a retreat for a unit that gets buffed when it charges, I'd be pretty psyched. So I don't know, Caleb, in your experience, how many of obviously the Kroxigor don't have charge bonuses, but what about the Saurus units? The ones that really hit hard, do they all have charge bonuses?
The Agrodons are the ones you're wanting to charge constantly. But the longer they stay in combat, their mount attacks, which don't get a charge bonus, are the ones that start getting better.
Fair.
So
Yeah.
there is some play there, but this really shines with Croxagore is where it makes it really good.
Yeah.
The pile-in I have found, I haven't gotten as many objectives with the extra pile-in as I thought because objectives have shrunk, and so with the objectives being smaller, it just means there's less territory on the board that's covered by an objective. So making small pile-in moves like this doesn't quite score you as many objectives as I thought it would, but it's still useful because you can do tricks. You can, do that last mortal wound to get you out of combat. You can pull something into combat if you don't want them charging if they get the priority into the next turn. Or I've piled in to tag something so that on my next turn it's not going anywhere and I can charge it with a different unit.
Exactly.
If I get the priority, or if it was their turn, you can do stuff that way. So it has its uses. Cool. Yeah, it definitely has its uses. It's not like crazy powerful or anything, but in the right instance, it can have some fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. It's not as fun to use as Shadow Strike Starhost for me, at least. But I think if I were to play a bunch of Croxigore or a bunch of Agrodons, yeah, you could see I would happily run Sunclaw. Okay, on to the last one then. Probably the least exciting one. I mean, at least flashy one. Sorry, flashy one. So add 2 to the health characteristic of friendly Seraphon monster units. So that's all of your Stegodons, your Troglodon, all of your Carnosaur variations, and on all of your Basiladons. It's okay for all of us that want to play dinosaurs riding dinosaurs, I suppose. Though you have Raptidons and such now as well, I guess. But I think a lot of Seraphon players picked up Seraphon because they wanted to play with the big dinos, and I just wish it was more viable in the current formats. But I think I would.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's unfortunate. We want to play with these big dinosaurs. That's half the reason we got into this army, is because it's got sweet giant dinosaurs. And as we talk through the rest of this battle tome, also the big monsters are a little disappointing, and so they could have made up for it here somehow with this battle formation, but +2 to health just isn't going to do it. They're too weak already. All of them have, basically most of them have a 4-up save with no other kind of bonuses, and so +2 to health to that just doesn't make enough of a difference.
Yeah, I would almost be okay with monsters being as bad as they are in our book right now if this made them pretty amazing, right? I don't know, maybe include something to offset the companion weapon debuff, something like that. That would make it feel so cool. Or, allow you to mess about with the army composition, right? Maybe allow you to build your army differently because you're in the Thunderquake Starhost. It's just really limiting still and not very exciting to play all your monsters.
Yeah.
Okay, Caleb, question. I take your point about a 4-up save on a monster like a Stegodon, but a Bastiladon with a 2-up with no rend, every point of health you add is adding 6 wounds absorption. That's making it pretty tanky, especially if you can all-out defense it. Now the question is, are Bastiladons worth their points, and/or can they do output? I mean, they're basically the steam tanks of Seraphon without shooting. Yeah. Well, they've even got shooting. Yeah. Like, is there no build where that's worth it? A 2-up save's pretty rare.
2-up save is nice. The melee Bastiladon, I think there's a build there where maybe you could lean into here and take a couple of those and shove them right into the face of the opponent.
Yeah.
Mid board, say, here, come try to remove this, and it will be difficult. They'll roll a lot of dice doing crits or mortals. But the one that's kind of been everyone's favorite for a long time, the shooting Bastiladon, the solar engine, it just doesn't have the output for it. So it's and every single one you take is gonna up your drops, and so they're just too expensive, not enough damage output, and if somebody tags them up, then they can't shoot, and at that point you don't care. If they have a 2-up save or not, they're only worth 5 on an objective. They're gonna sit there with a screen, and you're not gonna be able to kill it. So
Yeah. But they don't add to your drops if you take any Seraphon type leader, right? Like a Croak or a Slan.
True. Yeah. There's certain ways you could get around that, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and there's also we'll get to the list building later. But anyway, that's the first thing my thought goes to is where do you get the most value at adding +2 to health? I agree with you. A 4-up save is not doing it, but a 2-up's pretty nice. If I saw that on a Steam Tank list, I don't know if you had to ever play against the all Steam Tanks list, but it was a nightmare. And if they all got +2 health, I think it would be game over. Just for getting through that. I don't know if the Steam Tanks still have the juice anymore, and that's really more the question. Is 4th edition? I know the save stacking is gone, and this would be amazing there. But I don't know if the Bastildons have that output. So that would be where I'd be thinking. But yeah. Anyway, nice to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I actually played the Ark of Sotek Bastillodon in my last game, and while, as you mentioned, Ryan, it's very tanky and it did not really die at all. It just doesn't really do anything besides that. And in a lot of armies, I would feel okay about that. But with Seraphon, I don't know why, but it looks like we're going to delete stuff left and right, and that's just not the case. I feel like we play a very grindy game, and if you're stuck with your 270 points or something like that for a Ark of Sotek, Bastillodon is just, it's not wowing me at all. I'd rather spend my points elsewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I was going to ask you guys which one's your favorite, but I think we've kind of talked about it enough right now.
Sure.
Yeah. Shadow Strike if you're going Skinks. Sunclaw if you're going Saurus.
Exactly. Okay, cool.
Shadow Strike probably if you have a mix of it. So,
yeah. Okay, let's look at the faction terrain before we move on to enhancements. I keep postponing the enhancements here. This is the only image that I found of an actual Seraphon terrain piece that was high definition. So you guys get to look at some Nurgle guys with a Seraphon pyramid behind that. So the Realm Shaper engine, man. Are you actually forced to bring your terrain piece?
No.
Okay.
And so I'm playing OBR right now, and there's a real discussion. I'm going to a teams tournament in a week. There's a real discussion of, do we even want to paint this up in time? Because I think terrain pieces are often liabilities now.
Yeah.
They're just free charge targets that they can deep strike into. They can shoot it away. Like a lot of time, they don't deliver that much value. If your deployment zone's cramped, they're just eating up a whole lot of space. And this is one of the bigger ones, right?
Yeah.
So. I mean, I think OBR is maybe the biggest, but even still, like this one's not that far off. I don't know. Let's talk about what it's delivering, but I have a feeling it's not going to be enough.
Mm-hmm. So it's got 15 health, which is generous, and then a 4-up save, which is also fine. I think for a massive stone pyramid, I think it easily could have been 3-up save, but that's beside the point. Its abilities are actually quite nice, and they are very akin to what we had in our last book. Though I do feel like Fierce Guardians is way too strict in distance. So you get to add +1 to hit rolls for combat attacks made by friendly Saurus or Croxigore units that target an enemy units, while the enemy unit is within 9 inches of this terrain feature. So to get this buff off, you want to place your terrain feature as forward as possible. But then to win a game, you just don't want your terrain feature to be in the middle of the board at all. I think at least that's been my experience. If you want to play it more from the back, you've got the different ability here, Power Unleash. So in your hero phase, if there are any friendly Seraphon wizards within 3 inches of this terrain feature, you get to pick a different terrain feature within 24 inches. And you get to pick up to 3 enemy units within 3 inches of that terrain feature to be the targets. You roll D3, so on. You understand how it works by now. So on a roll of a 2-up on a D3, you inflict that amount of mortal damage. And if that terrain feature has a health characteristic, inflict D3 mortal damage on it. Caleb, I'm gonna listen to your opinion first because I'm most interested in that personally. So let's hear it.
Yeah, I think you hit on one of the biggest struggles for faction terrain. If it's big like this terrain piece is, it's very hard to place it. I found we play mostly using the terrain maps that are provided with each battle plan. That's how we set up our board. Yeah. And when we do it that way, it's very hard to put this in a place that's not going to block me from moving where I need to go. So a lot of times it ends up on the very back line. It ends up in the corner if I want it there for some reason. I've had games. I think my last OBR game, the OBR, they put theirs in their corner. I put mine in my corner. It was like, what are we doing here with these things? The Fierce Guardians, it's so short range and so limited, and it only affects Source and Kroxigor that it's almost useless. I think in all my games, it's come into play maybe once or twice, and I guess it's fine if that's happening, but if they're all the way over into your territory, which is probably where you're placing this, within 9 inches of it, the game may be over. I don't know. It's going to be pretty risky at that point. Power Unleashed is good. I've kind of found that most games, the most impact that Power Unleashed has is that it kind of messes with the opponent to make them stay 3 inches away from terrain.
Exactly.
I don't do much damage that way until like later in the game. Maybe they can't help but be within range of terrain, but a good opponent's just going to stay 3 inches away from every piece of terrain in their territory. I mean, it's
the best thing you can do is constantly remind your opponents, by the way, I've got this ability, just to get some mileage out of it at least. Yeah.
It's more of a hey, stay 3 inches away from that, kind of thing, and so it doesn't have that big of an impact. Maybe it's where I place it, but I think I've only had one opponent ever like attack it because it's when I tell them what they do, they're like, okay, yeah, and they ignore it too. Yeah. So I think I've had one opponent. I can't even remember if they killed it.
It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
They use it as a charge launching pad basically, and that's it. I've not played a game where I haven't placed this on the edge of my battle, of my deployment zone, and I mean the edge of the backside of that deployment zone. So it's been just because it's so big. I find it annoying in 3rd edition already, but at least it had some blocking abilities in that way. It made it possible for us to hide a slant behind it or croak behind it, and it was easier to get your castle because of it.
Yeah.
But now you can't use it at all that way because you're actually making yourself more vulnerable to charges and enemy damage because of it. So, yeah, I think it would have been nice if the declare step of Power Unleashed was just the generic ability, and then you got to choose whether you wanted to deal D3 mortal damage or apply a +1 to hit buff for your Saurus or Kroxigor, maybe like a little bit like a Hunter's Mark or something from D&D or World of Warcraft. Like you get to hit that guy Barry, guys, because your Seraphon wizard on his temple decided that.
Yeah,
something like that. So yeah, real missed opportunity here. And as a Luneth player, I feel so very spoiled with my moving temple.
Yeah, you could definitely, if you don't have a Realm Shaper engine, I'd say you're perfectly fine without it. You don't have to deploy it. There's been games where I bring it and I don't deploy it because it's just not going to benefit me anywhere. So.
Yeah, so Jonas, that leads to my question was, if it could teleport, what if it was like it's a spaceship, it goes back up, cool. And you teleport it somewhere else in the field? That'd be pretty neat, right?
Yeah. My question is, Ryan, does that teleport have the core keyword or not?
Well, this thing can't move anyway.
I know. The teleporting would be super cool. I don't know whether you guys have any experience with 40k, but you've got Necrons that have somewhat the same lore as Seraphon do, in a little bit at least, and they have these monoliths that teleport their units as a teleporting platform. I could totally see the Realm Shaper engine do something like that, and they actually gave those abilities to the Stormcast ring piece that's coming soon.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
I would have loved some recursion ability on this maybe, and just completely, walk away from the mortal wounds or mortal damage kind of thing, and just as a resurrection tool or teleporting tool, something like that.
Yeah.
Because I really don't feel like it's shaping any realms right now. Okay, Let's move on. Finally, enhancements. Here we are. So heroic traits, artifacts, and both spell doors, because we are one of the 2 armies that were lucky enough to get 2 spell doors. But unlucky enough that both of the spell doors are actually quite bad. At least in my regards. Let's start us off with the heroic traits here. So the heroic traits, I actually like all 3 of them. 2 I like more than the others, but we'll get to that in a sec. So first of all, let's talk about Being of the Stars. Being of the Stars makes you ethereal, basically. It lets you ignore modifiers to save rolls, both positive and negative, for this unit. So you use this on a Troglodon, for example, and his 4-up save is always going to be 4-up save. It's never going to be better, but it's never going to be worse either. And knowing that most units have at least 1 rent on their weapons, this usually means that you get a all-out defense for free. Sort of. Then you've got Beastmaster. It adds to... This is the one that you talked about, Caleb, when we were talking about the Great Plan and Sotek. Adds 2 to the move characteristic of friendly Seraphon cavalry and Seraphon monster units for the rest of the phase. So that's a little bit strange. If they are wholly within 12 inches of this unit at the start of the move. So that's weirded. That's worded weirdly. We will talk about them all after we've covered the 3 of them. And then we've got Reptilian Cunning. So if this unit charges this turn, if a friendly unit wholly within 12 inches of this unit uses an all-out attack command in the combat phase, no command points are spent. Okay, Caleb, which ones of these do you like best?
I do like all 3 of them. I think they all 3 have a play style. My absolute favorite is Beastmaster. It ends up being taken in most of my lists, as I've said multiple times already. Movement, wins games here. So extra movement on our cavalry is fantastic. Yeah. It does have to have a little bit of a restriction here, but generally you're going to be running that cavalry, at least starting that cavalry near a hero, to receive at least a few buffs, or because that hero is running along with them to go into combat. So I really like Beastmaster. That one's very good. Being of the Stars, this one on the surface seems extremely strong. I have tried to make this work so many times. I think if we had one of our monsters at a 3-up save,
yes,
this would be so much fun.
Yep.
But that 4-up save on all the things that you'd want to put this on, it's still good. So there's some combinations that you can make something really tough, like a Troglodon with Being of the Stars. It's going to be healing at the end of every turn. It has you could go into a spell where it's healing itself again. You can do some really fun stuff there. Yeah, there's an artifact to heal again. Yeah. So there's some really fun stuff you can do here. And I've found the times that I've run it, it does make it to where like a Carnosaur can kind of go and operate on its own, and it will stand up to more damage than what you would think it would. Yeah. So it does have a play. So Being of the Stars is fun. It is good. Even if you were to throw it on something like your Scar Veteran on Agrodon, for some reason you're not putting Beastmaster on him. If you did put Being of the Stars, it does make him pretty tough to take down. And he'll stick around, grab some objectives or something after he's popped his ability. But Reptilian Cunning, also a good one. When you charge, so you do have to charge with it, but you're going to be doing that with a hero that's going in with some cavalry or something, and basically just saving yourself a command point. So command points are extremely valuable in this edition. Anytime you can save yourself a command point, it's worth it, because they are so precious and there's so many good things to spend them on. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of stuff out there that will prevent you from using command points, and so this doesn't get around that. So if you were to run into that, you would still have the same restriction.
Yeah.
But it's good. If you want to save yourself a command point, go for that. The one I auto default to usually is Beastmaster, though. Yeah. +2 to move, getting our cavalry across the board.
Yeah, I would give Reptilian Cunning more of a look if it didn't have the condition if this unit charged this turn.
True.
Because we often, as you mentioned before, Ryan, you're usually running 2 drops, maybe 3. And how often are you actually running heroes that want to be in combat? Obviously, the Scarvedon Agrodon's a good pick there. But I've also run a lot of lists with just wizards, and then I never get to use this ability. I don't really find it strong enough to have that extra condition there. If it just said a friendly unit wholly within 12 inches, that would have been fine.
Yeah. If you have wizards and you're sending cavalry off to go attack, which is a lot of what we do, Beastmaster's perfect for that because you don't have to send that hero off with them to get that buff.
Yeah. I really want Being of the Stars to be better than it is. It looks so good, and I love running it on the Troglodon as kind of a meme almost with the extra healing, but in my last game, the Troglodon with Being of the Stars and all of its healing, it just got deleted from the get-go.
Yeah, there's still enough damage in the game that people will get through that 4-up save and kill it regardless.
Yeah, 4-up save and 12 or 14 wounds is not enough to keep things alive. Yeah. If there was a Bastillon hero, though, man, I would be all over this.
Oh,
that would be awesome.
That has to be kind of broken, yeah.
Yeah, that would be disgusting. Yeah.
That said, the Steam Tank Commander, at least in the 3rd edition book for cities, was able to do that with a spell. You can make him not rendable, and then he's just sitting on a 2-up save. Yeah, so that has happened. They're not GW has thought about doing that before.
Yeah,
I would definitely choose Beastmaster. You know, I could see the other two in the right situation, but I'm probably more inclined to play the fast cav.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, shall we move on to artifacts?
Let's do it.
Okay, so artifacts then. Once again, I'll cover all 3 of them, and we'll talk about them a little bit more. So the Coatl Familiar, pretty lengthy trigger text here. So once per battle, as a reaction, you declared a spell ability for a friendly Seraphon wizard within this unit's combat range. So keep in mind, it doesn't actually have to be on the units that has the Coatl Familiar. It could be a wizard within 3 inches. You add another d6 to the casting roll, basically. So usually you're rolling 3d6 for your casting. Pretty strong, but I won't say more on that before we cover all of the other stuff. So then the Incandescent Rectrices. If I get this right, it's the plumage that's attached to tails, I think.
Yep.
It heals your unit for D3, so this is kind of the meme thing that Caleb and I were talking about, because the Troglodon already heals D3 at the end of any turn, and now in any hero phase it also heals D3, so it's always going to get that 2d3 heal because it's both your end of phase and your opponent's end of turn, and then your hero phase or your opponent's hero phase. And then the Blood Rage Pendant. Add 1 to the attack characteristics of this unit melee weapons. Add 2 instead if the number of damage points allocated to this unit is equal to or greater than half of this unit's health characteristic, rounding up. Okay. As much as I love the heroic traits, I don't necessarily really love the artifacts, except for maybe the familiar. But once again, Caleb, guess go first. So
yeah, the Coatl Familiar is the one for me. It has the most potential to give me a bonus in a couple different phases. So the way I like to really use this, if you're going low wizards or something, only a couple casts, this is perfect to throw out a Kronspine in the opponent's turn, because you can now add an extra d6 to that cast. If there's a spell you really want to get off, like the Starseer spell to turn off a ward, I like this on my Starseer, so that when that big unit that they've got a 5-up ward on is in my space, I'm gonna be able to shut off its ward more reliably. So this one is just very good. It's only one spell, and so it is a little limited to that. So know what you're going to use it for. If there's an endless spell you really want out, this is a good one for that. It just kind of helps you make sure you get that one spell off. Now, unfortunately, there's no spell, I think, in our lore that's absolutely critical to the army, which is what you would want to use this for. But it still has its uses. If you know you need a run and charge, then pop this on Speed of Flanche when you cast it, just to make sure you get that. You know, if it's gonna win you or lose you the round or something. So Codal Familiar is generally my go-to artifact here. We are going to have wizards. Magic is very strong, so that's a good one. Incandescent Retresses, it is fun. It does feel like it wants to go in the Troglodon. The Troglodon just doesn't quite do enough.
Yeah.
Because there's such a cool build with that Troglodon, making it ethereal, healing twice, all this kind of stuff. But the Troglodon just doesn't quite do enough. This could go on like a Slon if you don't care too much about getting one specific spell off. If you want to make sure your Slon stays alive so that you can keep bringing back units, then
it's
maybe you put this on there.
Pretty good on the Scarvet on Agrodon as well.
Yeah, because he's usually going to be up there mixing it up. And so he'll be able to heal. And it is any hero face, so it's both mine and your hero faces. So that is good. And it will help clear some of the effects that are in the game, like Nurgle's, whatever their ability is, that puts the disease on you.
Yeah, the one as well, right?
Yeah, the burning, or whatever it's called, wildfire or something.
Right. Take a wheel.
That's what it's called, yes.
Okay.
Wildfire.
There you go.
Sorry,
so
weird,
it does have its uses.
Weird flame.
Weird flame.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Weird flame. Okay. Blood Rage Pendant. I don't really have a hero I really want this on. I mean, probably your Carnosaur, your Old Blood on Carnosaur is the best one, but really that's one attack at 3 damage if you're charging, so it's not insignificant, but it's not gonna change the world or anything. So.
If this would apply to companion weapons, I would be interested.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And I still think it wouldn't be amazing. I still think I would prefer the other two over it, but it's at least a flavorful pick then.
Yeah.
I really feel like they did a really good job of making it possible for us to combine the two playstyles, which is, for me at least, very fun because I just don't have a collection as big as a very seasoned Seraphon player. So I love that I can combine my army in ways that I want to now. But I really think they missed an opportunity to make our army more companion weapon friendly, I suppose, because I think that's so distinctive of the look and feel of Seraphon.
True.
And there's so many missed opportunities here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Reiner, is there any one of these three that you're thinking about more than others? Like for your armies that you're going, wow, if I had this in a Zinj army, or if I had this in an Idoneth army?
I can see how once per battle could be a cool thing for the casting, but it's just not I don't like once per battle abilities unless it wins me the game.
Once per battle, you win the game. Well, I'll take that one, I guess.
You pull the trigger. You guys were already talking about the spell lore is a little bit lackluster, and I'm like thinking, why do I need the once per battle D6? I would rather take a +1 to cast all the time if I had to, if my spell lore is not all that impressive. And, like you said about the healing, it's kind of, when do I really want to use this? Mm-hmm. And then having taken damage is such a risky kind of trade-off. I like the heroic traits a lot better than the artifacts, I'd have to say.
Yeah, I keep feeling like, I just wish I could pick 2 heroic traits instead of an artifact. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to spell lore. So as I mentioned, we've got 2. So the lore of Celestial Manipulation and the lore of Primal Jungles. Now, the first time that I looked at both of these spell lores, or at least heard of them, was actually on your review, Caleb. I was driving towards Worlds, I think, actually, to meet up with you, Ryan. So, wow, that's connected in a cool way. And when I listened to it, I was like, well, Primal Jungle seems so strong. But in all of my games, I've never been tempted to pick Primal Jungles, ever. Have you?
No, unfortunately not. It's It's celestial manipulation just about every time. There's maybe one or two lists where I'm trying to make like source heroes or source guard and warriors work, where I take the other one to give the extra rend. But
Yeah.
no, it's this one. This one's better because it has a. Well, we can talk about the spells, but it has more useful spells that will come into play
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah.
So
Okay, let's talk about the unlimited spell first, then the mystical unforging. You pick a friendly Seraphon wizard, blah blah blah, and then an enemy unit within 12 inches. Subtract 1 from the rend characteristic of that target's weapons until the start of your next turn. So that's nice, until the start of your next turn. By itself, I think this is actually a pretty strong spell, especially since you can do it with 2 wizards if you wanted to. You can't target the same unit, obviously, because a unit cannot be targeted by the same ability. Correct me if I'm wrong. Ryan, rules as judge.
you could be
If it's a
targeted by the
passive
same
ability,
spell, right?
it can't be stacked more than once. So
Oh.
this is an ability. So the definition of passive is if it. Which one are we talking about? Mystical Unforging?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but once an ability has been applied to something, it counts as passive from that point on until it goes away.
Right. So no stacking, right?
Right on. Yep.
No stacking. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
That I played it correctly then. Still, I think for a 6-up, it's neat. It's cool. It's basically giving some of your units +1 to hits. A little bit worse, I guess, because they could attack you with different units. But I've enjoyed this one, especially because you've got so many spells in your slan. At some point, you're gonna throw this one out. I just really wish it had 18 inches as a distance. 12 is so short, man.
12 is very short for something in the hero phase. Yeah.
Really brutal.
That's its only limitation. I think it would be really powerful if it was 18 inches, because I could throw this on the units I'm scared of. I could do the asterism for another -1 rend. I could really debuff the army really well. But this one, I find it hard to get this one off, especially early in the game. Later in the game, you can usually get this one off, but early on, it's harder because that 12-inch range is just so short.
Yeah, it's interesting as a magical intervention spell, but then I feel like a 7-up is too risky to spend your command point on. I think for such a marginal bonus.
What about the projection through a skink from a slan?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Yeah.
It does help, especially, a lot of times you'll have like a slan and some guards sitting at your back objective. You'll be pushing your other wizard with maybe some Croxagore or something else up the side, and so you can project it from that skink wizard, which is helpful. So that'll help you get it off that way.
Yeah.
It's a good spell, just short range.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever had a time where I've wanted to do it unlimited, like with multiple units, but maybe it just hasn't come up yet. Maybe it will.
I think it would have been neat if it would be able to stack on an enemy unit, because then you could really neuter big monsters or a big hero. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to Comet Skull then. Comet Skull, man, how the mighty have fallen. They really did our Comet Skull dirty. I'm super salty about it. I'm not gonna lie. So I'm not gonna give too many opinions on this one, if I can, hold myself back here. So it's 7-up to cast. Pick a friendly Seraphon wizard to cast a spell. Then pick a visible enemy within 18 inches. 18 inches is nice, obviously, but there were times where you could do it on wherever.
Yeah.
Then you make your usual casting roll. Roll a dice for each model in the target unit. For each 5+, inflict 1 mortal damage on the targets. Caleb.
It's a good spell. Don't get me wrong. I think what ruins it is that they called it Comet's Call. This has been our signature spell for a long time. Comet's Call has, and this is not this spell. This spell is Stellar Tempest, which is one of our other spells, and used to be. And so it's a good spell. I think it's not Comet's Call. What are you doing? It's a horde busting spell. If you're going up against those clan rats, if you're facing something that has a whole lot of models in it, this is a great spell to hit them with some mortal wounds. It may be our only damaging spell that we have.
Yes, except for Croak.
Our only useful damaging spell that we have. So it is good. So cast it when you're going up against things. And its range is good, 18 inches. So you will cast this in the course of your games.
Yeah, I'll say this: it actually the effect fits the name better than it did before, because before it was almost more of a hero sniper. And then I was always like, how small is this comet that we're calling to hit this guy on his head? So I could see this squashing a bunch of guys. So it makes much more sense in that regard. It's just, I really miss a dedicated damage spell. As a spell slinging army, at least we used to be that. There is just almost no damage spells. Well, there is one in Primal Jungles, I guess. But I wish this was more applicable to small units as well, because I tend to come up against smaller units much more often than against big units so far.
Yeah.
Especially with Morbid Conjuration being as strong as it is, it's basically the same effect that the Gravetide has. So you're a bit spoiled for choice there, I guess.
Yeah, you can hit some hordes pretty hard with if you combo this with Gravetide. Yeah.
True. Ryan, anything to add on the Comet's Call?
I had the exact same thought as Caleb. They shouldn't have called it Comet's Call, and that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. On to Speed of One shit, and this is probably the only spell in all of the 2 lores where I'm like, this improves my gameplay so much. On a 6-up, which is so generous, thank you Games Workshop, you pick a friendly Seraphon unit wholly within 12 inches of your casting wizards, and then until the start of your next turn, the target can use run abilities and then still use shoot and or charge abilities later in the turn. In and of itself, it's pretty strong, but with all of the other movement stuff that we've got going on, it's such a nice ability. I think I like it more than its previous iteration even, and it was so strong back then.
Yeah, it's a very good spell. This is the reason you're taking this spell lore is for Speed of Wanchi. Yeah. Any Seraphon unit can take this, so it's not keyword locked to any specific type of unit. So anybody can take this,
right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think it was like a hero phase move or something, right? Was that what that was?
You got to move in your hero phase, which was nice. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It was very good, especially because skins were such an auto include in that kind of play style.
Yeah, this just combos so well into what our cavalry wants to do, which is move really fast. And so this is just another aspect that we can throw onto those cavalry to make them move really far.
Or even Croxigor, right, Caleb? I mean,
sure. Yeah.
Sodic Deliverer, Croxigor move up from 5 to 7 inches, then auto random 6. You're moving 13 inches, and then you still get the charge. I mean,
yeah. So all of a sudden, Croxigor are scooting. Yeah.
My last game I played against Stormcast with a unit of 3 Croxigor, normal ones, not a War Spawned, and I swear to God, we just swapped deployment zones almost, because he dropped in so much in my back line, and I just mopped his entire back line up with 1 Croxigor unit. I killed 20 Stormcast boys.
Nice.
Just because they kept tagging stuff, and he was so surprised by how speedy they were.
Yeah.
Really
strong. That shouldn't surprise him. Stormcast is extremely fast. Yeah. I played my son, he plays Stormcast, and all these buffs that we're talking about putting on our cavalry, they basically get for free.
Oh, yeah.
Their cavalry moves 14 and runs in charge. All that is on their War Scroll. So we won't try to compare battle tomes here, but...
Yeah. Ryan, anything?
Nah. Yeah, it seems like this army used to be a much more spell-centric one. So, these are kind of spells I could expect to see in any army's spell lore, and not particularly impressed. But, they're good. They're just normal.
Yeah. It's interesting how we had 2 different playstyles before, where you had the castle magic magic slinging build, and then you had the Saurus tanky build, and I guess you also had the monster build. And now we've moved away from all 3 of those, and we've started in the era of Seraphon's just really fast.
Yeah, it's kind of definitely a change of play styles for the army. So the army has taken a massive, course direction change, and the playstyle is very different.
I think it's one of the reasons why we're not seeing a lot of Seraphon doing well at tournaments, because it's just such a different book.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff, if you had been playing Seraphon a few months ago, you would be putting a Croak, Slan, and then just a bunch of filler on the board and summoning stuff in, and that doesn't even exist anymore. It's like a completely different army.
Yeah, I'll save my my overall opinion for the last slide, but I told one of my friends, the Stormcast friend that I played against recently, it's just such a fair army now, Seraphon.
Yeah.
I used to feel so dirty after playing it, and I'm not gonna lie, it was also one of the reasons why I was attracted to it. I mean, I am a Lumineth player at heart, so playing dirty is how I roll. But yeah, at least I get the Lumineth speed now with Seraphon, so that's neat.
Yeah, I haven't had anybody complaining against playing Seraphon these days. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Primal Jungles. I'm less familiar with these spells because I've just not seen a good time to use these. So Light of Chotek, the unlimited spell here, you pick a friendly Seraphon unit hold within 12 inches, and then you roll a number of dice equal to the number of damage points the target has. So keep in mind you now apply damage to a unit and not a model. Not that it would matter that much for this ability. For each 4-up, heal 1 the targets.
It's fine. It's only going to be ever as good as the monsters are. This is a monster healing spell is what this is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what it wants to be. So if monsters are no good, then this spell is no good.
Yeah.
The weird thing about this spell mathematically is that it okay, so imagine you're driving and you see a sign on the road and it says this many miles to your destination or this many kilometers. And you think, well, I'm going to go that speed. And then as you keep getting closer, you keep seeing the sign change. You adjust your speed to be that far. So you're always an hour away. And what this ends up saying basically is it's based on how many damage points you have. So the weird thing is every time this goes off, and you can stack it if you have enough wizards, because it's not the kind of effect that lasts, so it doesn't have a restriction. Every time you use it, it becomes less impactful. And then that's the weird thing is even the best unit you could put this on is on a Bastiladon, because every wound you heal is functionally like 6 wounds absorption with no rend. But what's the chance that it's taken enough damage for this to make a big deal? Like, even if it's taken half of its damage, what do they have? 12 health, and they've taken 6. You're only healing 3 the first time. The second time you do it, you're doing 1.5. And then it's kind of like Archon spell. I forget what the name of the Archon spell is, but the one that kind of unlimitedly used to be able to keep doing mortal damage.
Curse of Years.
Curse of Years, yes.
Yeah.
It has amazing potential for the rest of eternity, if you will. Like, imagine you took a Gargant with you. Can you heal a non-Seraphon? Oh, you have to heal a Seraphon unit. If it was just friendly unit, then you have a bigger wounds pool to be healing. But in any case, this spell just feels really weird as an unlimited spell to me. Like, unless you've got a whole lot of targets in your army. Again, we're trying to focus on lower drops armies at this point. So maybe you're running more reinforced units than you are, MSU. Then why is this the unlimited spell? I don't know. I feel like if it said 4+ for you roll a dice for each health characteristic point they have, then we're talking,
Yeah.
But when it's the amount of damage points they've taken, like, again, going back to Croc Score, how many wounds do Croc Scores have
6.
now? 5 health?
6.
6. Yeah.
6. So then, the most they can have on them is 5. And then you're healing on average 2.5. And I don't know how much of an impact that is. I'd rather just use Rally. It's saving you a CP at that point. So I don't know. I feel like this spell is kind of working against the nature of the game. Caleb, am I totally off on this?
No, you're right. You're right. That I've cast it one time with the Troglodon, just trying to keep it alive, and it was okay. But it goes into that whole thing of what's my Troglodon doing? Even if I do keep it healed up, it's not doing anything anyway. So it just doesn't have a good target for it. It's not a great. I don't think it's a great spell.
There are so many ways that you could fix this. As you mentioned, Ryan, it could be based on the amount of health you have. The roll could be a 3-up. I would be totally fine with it not being unlimited and the roll being on a 2-up or something. But the thing that I would love is if it, as you mentioned, Ryan, if it actually procs rally, a second rally, I suppose, a non-rally on your units, so you could also use it to return models.
Yes.
Because,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, the lore right now still states that Seraphon are celestial beings, right? So at least you would have some recursion, which would fit the theme perfectly, right?
And this one, you know, it feels like it wants to go into the Saurus side of things, the
Yes.
primal jungles, the coalesced type of stuff. If this was some type of recursion, you know, bring D3, you know, either heal D3 or bring back that amount of models kind of
Yes.
thing, that would be perfect into like a warriors or a guard type of play style, which is what one of the other spells plays into.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now I think it wants to be a monster healer, and there's just no real role for that.
I really think it could make warriors look amazing if you bring 20 warriors and this spell would return models, you know, or guard, obviously. It would feel like the old days where you were healing back zombies.
Yeah.
And that's just such a cool image for me with Seraphon. Like their light is being put together again by a Slan and just like, you're restored, my friend.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, so not a great spell. Very niche cases where you're going to get value out of this. Then we've got the Earth Trembles. So this is our only damage spell besides the Comet Skull and the Croak spell. So you pick a point on the battlefield within 18 inches of your wizards, and then you draw a straight line between the target point and the closest part of the caster's base. Roll d3 for each unit, friendly and enemy units. That has models pass across by this line on a 2+, so that's a 2+ on the d3. Inflict an amount of mortal damage on that unit equal to the roll. As a Lumith player, I've actually played a bunch with this kind of spell because this was one from the High Peaks lore, and Teclis used this one quite often when I played him. Let me tell you that 18 inches is super generous for this kind of ability. It's really amazing. The only thing that I really don't like about it is it's an 8 to cast. And obviously it also hits your own units, which is not great, but you know, sure, you could measure this so that it doesn't, or probably doesn't. But an 8 to cast is actually quite rough.
Yeah, it's a high cast spell. And this one got nerfed from the previous one too, because it used to be all the way across the board. And even at that, I didn't cast it all that often. But 8 to cast is a little rough. I find, well, have I ever cast this? I'm trying to think back about my games. I think I've cast it once or twice. And it tends to be with a smaller wizard who's up the board.
Their guard,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Slan's a little bit further behind. The Slan seems to be the one that would be better at casting this because his guard don't mind that D3 mortal wounds because they'll have a 5-up ward. But he's usually a little bit further back and out of range to cast this. But 18 inches is good, and there'll be, if you're taking this spell lord, there'll be times where you need to do that last little bit of mortal wounds, and it's worth trying even on an 8.
Yeah, the only reason why I actually kind of feel this spell as how should I put this, as an interesting part of the lore is because we have no reach for damage. It's all melee because our range damage sucks. If you want to get into Seraphon range damage, go check out Caleb's latest video, or second latest by now, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I can't remember.
But yeah, coming from a point where I was playing the Croak lists and being able to snipe heroes left and right, and now this being the only chance that I have to actually deal with an enemy hero that's being protected well, man, really a big bummer. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on to the actual cool spell from this lore?
Do it.
Empowered Celestites. So if you're playing OBR, or you used to play OBR, I'm actually not sure, Ryan, whether it's still in the book, but I imagine it is. There were ways to increase the rend of your melee weapons. This is basically the same thing. So you pick a friendly Saurus units wholly within 12 inches of your wizards, and then you add 1 to their rend characteristic of their melee weapons for the rest of the turn. It's a really sad thing that it doesn't say until the start of your next turn, because I don't feel it's strong enough to have this addendum to it, but here we are. How are you guys feeling about this spell? Caleb?
Yeah, it's a good spell. I think you identified the weakness. It's only for the rest of the turn. I could see it being used as a spell where you're going to cast this in the opponent's hero phase if they're going to come try to attack some warriors or something. Maybe if you're sending it in, it does work on all Saurus units, so you could put this on Agrodons. But what are you sacrificing for this? So you're sacrificing the other spell lore. So you're sacrificing Run and Charge for +1 Rend. So this only affects the rider's weapons, not the companions. So as you're looking at that, is it worth giving up Run and Charge for +1 Rend? So that's kind of where I'm weighing that between the two. It's very strong if you get it onto warriors and send warriors in. You've got 20 warriors. You'd have 40 attacks at -2 Rend, and that's not too shabby. You're going to do some damage that way. I don't know if it's strong enough to play into this versus the Run and Charge.
What I would love to see is that this becomes the unlimited spell.
That would be interesting because then if I could cast this onto multiple Saurus units and it lasted till the start of my next turn, all of a sudden I've turned my army into some porcupines here. You don't want to charge any of these things. Yeah.
And it's impactful enough in that regards to make this spell lore worth it, first of all. And second of all, it opens up an entire different play style where you're actually tempted to bring a lot of foot Saurus. Sure. I could potentially see them doing this, but we'll see. Games Workshop, if you're listening to this, feel free.
Yes, please.
Okay, Ryan, anything to add before we move on to this list, I think?
You mentioned OBR. The main way they're getting the thing you're referring to is one of the two relentless discipline things they have, and it's only if they got charged they get +1 Rend. So it's you have to have the right setup. It's not as generous as it used to be.
Yeah. Then it was in 3rd edition where they had empowered netherite weapons or something like that, right?
That's just crits go off on 5s.
Okay, that's the one. Okay, yeah, cool. Okay, would have been funny to see that return on the Seraphon spell. Anyway, let's look at some Warscrolls first before we get into the list. So, as I mentioned, guys, we're not going to show off all of the Warscrolls. We would sit here for half a day with the input the three of us would have. So we selected 6 units. 4 of these were selected mostly because they are amazing in our army, and 2 of these were selected because I really wanted to talk about them. Little pop quiz here. Which ones do you guys think are the ones that were selected just because I wanted to talk about them and not because they're good? I'll give you a second. Pause the video. Ryan, you did a lot of maths for these guys. Can you tell which ones are kind of the meme choices here?
The U choices, the Troglodon, and then either Croak or the Hunters of Wanchi, depending on which direction you're going with them. Yeah. But that's what I would go. Yeah,
you're correct. The Troglodon and Croak are a little bit of the meme choices here. The Agrodons, the Raptidons, the Croxigor, and the Hunters of Wanchi are actually all excellent, and you can see them in all of the Seraphon lists, basically. Caleb and I built lists separately without discussing what we would include, and I think we both made lists that included all 4 of these units. Still different lists, but it's just funny that it happens that way. Okay. Anything to add, Caleb, before we move on to the Warscrolls here separately?
No, all good.
All right, let's talk about our boy, the Oracle on Troglodon. So for 280 points, you get this monster. 14 wounds, if I'm not mistaken, on a 4-up save. It's Wizard 1. And the neat thing about him is he heals D3 at the end of any turn, as we mentioned before, and he has mortal damage on the claws, which is actually one of the rare cases where we can still find mortal damage in our book. Why do I think this is actually a neat unit to pick? Please do not run this guy up in the middle of the board, because as I mentioned before, he's just going to die. He's not tanky enough, not even with Being of the Stars on him. He's pretty cool as a flanker, though. He's actually a pretty good unit to bring Beastmaster on, because he'll still be able to keep up the pace with your faster stuff, your faster cavalry and monsters, and he would actually apply it to himself as well, I think. Yeah, he would. He's a monster. Yeah. As I mentioned, he's got some fun interactions with the trade and artifacts. He can bring Croxigor and Skinks, which the Croxigor are a great unit to bring with him. And keep in mind, you can sling a spell through him with the Slan. So those are all reasons why you would bring him. Now, there are also a lot of reasons why you wouldn't bring him. Caleb, maybe I'll let you chat about those if you feel confident about that.
Okay, sure. The Troglodon has long been a very good utility piece for our army. It had a lot of uses. We see a lot of those same things on its War Scroll, but they've all been toned way down. Now, instead of being a utility piece that kind of sits behind your units that you want in combat, this thing has to get into combat to proc most of its unique abilities. And it just doesn't do enough in combat to make it worth its points. It is a wizard, so I mean, don't undervalue that. It does have a lot of wounds. It can be taken with some very interesting tools. So it's not a completely useless model. I think as we see its points decrease over the next couple of battle scrolls, it's going to get more and more interesting the cheaper it gets. But it just doesn't quite do enough in combat, because its biggest role is that the thing that you would want it the most for is its ability, what's it called? Noxious Roar, where it will give a -1 to hit. And so that's what it had in the previous books. It follows that through, but now it has to be in combat range, and it can fail it very easily because you have to roll a 3 up. So now what used to be guaranteed bubble of -1 to hit for a very large range, you have to get into combat. It can easily fail. So it's just not as useful as it used to be. With as elite as things have become now, I find my list, I just don't have enough points for this wizard instead of a different wizard. Starseer is cheaper, has more casts, has a really, really good War Scroll spell, and this wizard doesn't have a War Scroll spell. It used to have a really good one where you could really debuff the enemy.
Yeah.
So it's been toned down a lot. I think it needs to drop down in points. If it gets to the right points cost, I think it'll be useful again.
What would you be willing to pay for it?
What would I be willing to pay? It's okay. It's definitely got to be cheaper than the Slan. It does less damage than the Carnosaur and still has some of the same abilities like Terror and things. And Carnosaur could take all that, so it's got to be cheaper than the Carnosaur. So like 240.
Yeah, I was going to say 240 as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be a unit that ends up, if it's operating on its own, like you said here, a flanker, it could be quite difficult to take down. But if you're throwing it into the middle of the opponent's army, it's going to get killed. So, I have had this thing stuck into combat and been extremely disappointed that it's not killing anything.
Yes.
And
just dying, you're not killing.
Yeah.
The obvious comparison here, as you've made already, is with the Carnosaur, because it's the same kit. Maybe you are one of the Seraphon players that built a Carnosaur and then stuck this guy's back on the base and made it pop out of the water to have 2 units. That was a classic Seraphon thing to do for a long time, or Lizardman thing even. So that's why I asked Ryan to do some maths here. And Ryan, I'm gonna, give you the wheel here, and let's look at some stats.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so Jonas, you gave me some assignments, which I actually dedicated some time to.
Thank you.
which is nice. So anyone that's seen any of my stats before, this is how they usually look. I go from left to right with the output, the expected value of the output against a 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 save. Then we skip a little bit. Then we have expected value average, which is literally an average of all of those expected values, which you could say is the same as a 4+ save. I've repeated this multiple times, but we have new people listening. Especially considering this edition is less save stacky and it's less likely to know that you're going to actually shift a 4 up to a 3 up or a 3 up to a 2 up. What you see is often what you get, especially with how rare CP usage. You really want to save those for the better CPs. So I usually say a 6 up is roughly as common as a 2 up, a 5 up, a 3 up, and a 4. And saying something against a 4 up save, though it's an easy metric, depending on what meta you're up against and what kind of range you've got, they're not all built the same. So sometimes the expected value average column in the right side there will look identical to what we see at a 4 up, but a lot of times it's a little bit different. So that's why I do it. And it's just a good summary. Anyway, so the Oracle, I've scaled, it looks so small here because I scaled it to the Carnosaurs, so you can see that it's missing a lot of output. But the ranged output is better for what it's worth. It's about twice as good. And then the melee base is in orange, and then melee, assuming you've got the Itzel the Tamer buff, it's actually not that much better. I was actually a little bit surprised that it was better because this thing does crit mortals, but then you're swapping it for crit exploding hits. And you can't have both. So that's why it only goes up a little bit unless you're up against a 3 up or a 2 up save, then it goes down, as you see there. So anyway, that's the Oracle. But let's move on to the next one. So this would be the Old Blood on Carnosaur as a base profile. I did the Old Blood and not the Scar Veteran because the Scar Veteran doesn't have a shooting profile and is basically just the same thing as the Old Blood, but cheaper otherwise in terms of output. The ranged is worse, but this is assuming that it did not charge. So its melee base is way higher at a kind of expected value average of around 9. And then with Itzel the Tamer, it jumps up to about 11.5 maybe. And then if you go to the next one, we'll get back to the Troglodon, but then we're going to look so you can see it again. So there's another comparison. It drops down. And then the next slide will be the Carnosaur on the charge, and it goes up even higher. So again, the range didn't change, but on the charge, the rider gets extra damage. I think about, what would that be?
It goes up to 30 damage, yeah.
Have a 50% output. Yeah, there we go. Yep. And so we're looking at with just a regular normal charge, we're looking at maybe 10.5, 10 2/3, and then with Itzel the Tamer, we're looking at around 13. So Jonas, does this? Obviously, when you take into account a Warscroll, you're not just looking at its output. There's other stuff going on. You asked me to do this comparison. I feel like these two units have very different roles to play, right? This is telling a story about what their output is, but maybe you're not taking it just for the output, right? They both have terror, right, which is subtracting 2 from the control score, so that's something that doesn't change between them. But what about the rest of the story? Caleb, Jonas, what are we talking about here? Is there a reason that you would ever take the Troglodon over the Old Blood, or are you even taking the Old Blood? Is that not enough output for how much you're paying for it?
Go for Caleb.
I think if you're taking a monster, you're probably gonna take the Source Old Blood on Carnosaur as your monster because it does have decent output. The Troglodon just doesn't quite do enough, and we have other wizards. If this was our only wizard or something, then you'd be forced to take it. But we have better wizards, so that's the thing that makes it kind of unique is that it's a wizard. But no. Source Old Blood will do better damage, and you can still take the same heroic traits and artifacts on the Carnosaur if you want to give it that same type of role where it's healing and it's ethereal. It won't heal quite as much, but it'll heal enough to keep it going.
Yeah. The problem that I have with all of our monsters right now is, except for Raptidon Chargers with priority target, I don't feel like one of our units is strong enough to completely delete an enemy unit with certainty. So very often when I have a monster and let's say Agrodons or Croxigor in combat, I want to use one of the other units first. I want to use Agrodons first, or I definitely want to use the Croxigors first because they are just flat out amazing, at least in my experience. And then you get the retaliation on your monster because it hasn't fought yet. And with only a 4-up save, is just such a feel bad that not only it might not only just die, but it'll definitely get bracketed, and then it's even worse. And as we know, companion weapons are very hard to buff, and then all monsters are only hitting on a 4-up, which is brutal if you're faced off against a unit that has -1 to hit, like the Lumineth formation or the unlimited spell from the Gits. Ugh. It feels really, really bad bringing a monster, because I love how they look on the table. I place them, I get them into combat, and I just feel bad that they're in combat because I know that they're gonna die, and I feel so obligated to use my other units first because they're actually gonna do the work. Would you say that's correct, Caleb?
Yeah, I think so.
Real bummer. Once again, I think if Games Workshop really played this army a lot, it would have been interesting as a battle formation, except for, apart from the 2 health that you get, maybe allow a monster to strike first.
You do get that a little bit with the Source Old Blood, but he has to be fighting another monster, and he has to have wounded that monster somehow before melee, which is more difficult than you think for Seraphon. So there's a little bit of that, but not much. Yeah, we don't have a lot of strike first type stuff. So,
and that's why I would argue that the Bastillodon is actually the only monster that I would bring right now. Is I can easily let that not go first, because it doesn't have to deal damage. It's just there to tank stuff up.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe I'm being too negative, but I just want to use my big boys.
I think there. While we're on the topic of monsters, I think there is a play for maybe like one Engine of the Gods. Okay. We haven't said that in a long time, but it's getting to the point where it is cheap enough. It's only 210 points.
Yeah, that's true.
And it does have a little bit of useful abilities. You're probably not going to use it turn 1, so you've wasted 1 turn with a monster already, but it's only 210 points.
Yeah.
Turn 2, you can probably bring back a Croxagore model if one's been injured, or you might get to fight first with everything that's within 12. So there is some play maybe there with the Engine of the Gods, some heals also. So if you're looking for a monster, don't be totally disheartened. There is a little bit of play maybe in a fun list for like an Engine of the Gods to kind of to buff up some of your stuff.
The irony.
It's not a great pick, but it's cheap enough that I think it can have a role.
Yeah, the irony of the thing is that in the faction focus preview, I really tore into the Engine of the Gods. I don't know whether you remember that, Ryan, and Caleb. I think posted on our video, so you definitely listened to it.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
it's
so
disappointing.
salty.
I mean, it's not a great war scroll, but it's a cheap war scroll. It's a cheap monster.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I didn't know the price back then. I was just so disappointed. Once again, I was like, how can they mess this war scroll up once again?
I know.
Yeah.
Well, here's a giant monster that looks awesome. Hey, don't use it for a turn or 2, and then maybe you'll get something cool out of it.
Okay, enough whinging. Let's go to. I said enough whinging, but here we are with Lord Croak. Damn, I set myself up for disappointment here. So, Lord Croak, such an awesome model. One of the models why I wanted to start Seraphon. It's sick. It's really good.
Yeah.
It's even better when you see it on a tail. It's so menacing for a 1,000-year-old toad. Well, tens of 1,000 years old. You for 460 points, you get this amazing model on the table. It's a 3-cast wizard, same as a normal Slann, which is surprising. He has a 4-up save and a 4-up ward, which I thought was amazing when I first looked at his war scroll, especially when I was doing the techless comparisons. I was so disappointed that Croak got this. But then he really needs it to stay alive now, because he's got this ability, Dead for Innumerable Ages, where he has 18 wounds or 20 now. I don't know what
18,
the amount.
yeah.
18. And you basically roll at the end of the turn now, which is way worse than it was before. You roll 3d6, and if it tops the damage that he took that turn, he just dies. Which was which is different from before, because before you roll that after every phase, which was generous because you usually didn't get him in combat, and you might survive a shooting phase, but now you need to survive a hero phase, a shooting phase, and a combat phase. Well, that's gonna be difficult. Still, though, what does he bring to the table? He's a 3 power level wizard, which is nice, and he has a 2+ to cast, which is really strong, you guys. Definitely don't sleep on a 2+ to cast, because there's no unbind bonuses anymore, or at least very little. So +2 to cast is very strong. He still has his mortal damage spell, which is one of the only reliable sources of mortal damage that we have from spells. And with endless spells being as present as they are, he's actually quite a strong piece. The question is, the age-old question is he better than a normal Slann? Caleb, what do you think?
No. Short answer is no. You look at this War Scroll, and Croak has had his ups and downs since Age of Sigmar has existed. So there have been editions where he is amazing, and then very briefly in some editions he's not been very good. I think we're at a point where you're not going to see him on the table much. You're going to see the other Slann. When you look at this War Scroll, it almost seems like they want Croak to be in combat, like a very aggressive War Scroll, but it's just so risky because you take 3 damage, you take 2 damage, and this guy could die instantly. So with that kind of risk, you can't afford to get Croak into the mix, and so. It's interesting because he is tough. A 4-up save and a 4 ward is very good. But that also means he's working against some of the natural buffs that our army has, with like the Source Guard. Source Guard is what you would take with your Slann or Lord Croak. Why would you take them now? They're not going to buff Lord Croak at all.
Yeah.
And so, a very interesting War Scroll. His spell, it's just not as good as it used to be. For one, there's no way to extend the range. We always had these fun abilities where you could extend Croak's range a lot further, and that made him viable. Well, without all of those,
he has
source
forecast as well.
Yeah, true. Without ways to make his range bigger, that spell is stuck at 12 inches. Now, you do have a Skink Vassal cast you can go through. You could do Spell Portal, but what are we getting for that? I mean, his spell is not that great. It's the standard, D3 on a 2-up. It does D3 mortal wounds, which means of his 3 casts, if you repeat that mortal wound spell, you're gonna fail one of them. Let's say you fail one of them casting just because it's a spell, so you might cast it or get unbound, and then the other one you roll a 1 or 2 on that D3 roll, and now that one does no mortal damage.
Yeah.
So you could have Croak, this almost 500 point model that does D3 mortal wounds. So what else can you get for him? I mean, he is really good at casting endless spells. So he's really good at casting endless spells. So that is there. But then you look at the Slann, and the Slann does the same thing. Not quite as good of a caster, not quite as tough. You take some guard, but the Slann just offers more in that it can resurrect units.
And +1 to cast for all your other wizards as well. The Slann is actually a force multiplier, whereas Croak is a force in and of himself. And I think if you don't know a lot about Seraphon and you hear us whining about him now, and then you compare his 3rd edition War Scroll with his current War Scroll, you're like, not that much has changed. But then his biggest nerfs are actually the other units that he interacted with. As you mentioned, there is no way to increase his range, and the Source Guard don't tank wounds anymore for him.
Yeah.
I think...
Yeah, so it's an odd piece.
Yeah. One of those nerfs would have been enough for me to think twice about him, and now he got triple or quadruple nerfed in so many different ways, and his price is the same or even more, I think. Or he used to be 480 maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Rough.
Yeah, so I think Slann's the choice over Croak right now, and it's a pretty easy choice, I think.
Yeah. That being said, just to end on a positive note here for Croak, Teclis is being brought in Lumineth lists simply because he's so dominant in the endless spells department. So I could see a reason to bring Croak for that. I just wish he had +2 to Unbind as well, because then he would also be dominant. He would just dominate the magic phase in a way, and that would be cool. But yeah, we'll see. Yep. I think they'll make some changes to him. They just really didn't want a full Croak spam list once again, I think, for the start of 4th edition.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
Jonas, you asked me to look at the stats, and I can just talk about it a little bit. First off, one point that's worth pointing, I'm shocked at how cheap the Star Master is, the Slaawn is. A 3-cast wizard with a +1 who has all the other things he's bringing, and a Lord of Change costs, 80 points more to be a 2-caster and not have any buffs. Well, he's got +1, but... that's kind of crazy. Now, then again, your spell lore is depending on what you're trying to do. And like I said, trying to bring another caster, so this like casting through a skink wizard is implicitly saying that you're bringing another hero, because you can't take one of them as an italics hero in the regiment of one of your heroes. So then if you want to use that 1-2 punch of a Slaawn or Croak going through a skink, you're already at 2 drops, which is maybe all the drops you want to have. But then, I don't know. So that's a tough one. As far as the output, Caleb, you're right. Obviously you can fail. If we exclude the fact that you could have someone unbinding your spells, and you exclude the fact that you could just fail casting them even with a +2, the average that you're doing on that, if you get all 3 spells off, is still 5 mortal damage per unit that's within your within your 12-inch bubble that you can choose. That's taking into account failing the roll, the D3 roll. So it's still, if you get all 3 of them off, it's still 5, and that's still something. And especially if you can project one of them through a skink, and then another one, let's say, if you absolutely have to, through a portal. It could be interesting, I guess. But 400 and what was it? 410 points, 60 points. Yeah. Gosh, like you said, I think he does kind of. That's the big thing. The impression you just made on me now is that he really does want to be in kind of the middle of everything, which is weird, So I don't know. Maybe if the guy was tankier, if he had the ethereal save, or who knows, like a 4-up that's all flat 4-up all time, that could be kind of interesting. But then the fact that he can just die on his own like that, which is always how he's been, I guess, at least since the more recent rebuild of the Warscroll in the past few years. I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about this, and I'm really sad for that such a centerpiece model. Like Jonas, you were talking about Teclis being, what he is, and we're kind of in an edition where who's the guy, Usharon from Feck, or Alariel or Nagash, or so many of the big centerpieces are great, but they kind of went the other direction with Croak. It seems like he's not an auto take, it seems, anymore.
He does nothing for the army. That's the worst part of it, I think.
Yeah. So I don't know. I get what you guys are saying. I'm surprised you didn't want to talk about Slaawn as a comparison to this guy as a direct Warscroll to Warscroll.
I didn't want to talk about the Slaawn because we're gonna see the Slaawn in almost every list. That's at least that was my prediction before I saw Caleb's list as well. So I figured we'll talk about Croak while we can.
That's fair.
Okay, on to some cool stuff then, because guys, you might think Seraphon have got nothing fancy, but wow, we got some really strong units. Some things that were cleared up, for example, on the Agrodons, their rage tokens are much nicer now. So for 210 points, you get 3 Agrodon Lancers that have pretty decent damage. That also increases for their companion weapons, at least, if they are still in combat at the end of the turn. So that's pretty cool. Why are you picking this unit? Well, it's one of our best damage dealing units. Caleb, I think a couple of months ago you made a video, that's your usual approach, where you've calculated their damage versus a 4-up save, and then divided it by the points or something like that.
Yeah, just to kind of, I try to figure out what's my most efficient unit for points per damage, basically. What am I paying for the damage? These guys tend to do very well in that.
Yeah, they're top 3, I think.
Yeah.
The cool thing is about them is that they're just so buffable. You've got the Asterism for their companion weapons, but you've got the Scarvet on Carnosaur. Is it Carnosaur? No.
Scarvet on Agrodon.
Agrodon, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah. On Agrodon. That buffs them. They take a lot of Saurus buffs well. You could still do speed of 1 on them as well if you wanted to. And they're quite tanky, as in they have a big health pool. Only a 4-up save still, which is a pity. But yeah, a unit of 6 is actually quite strong. I ran a unit of 3 and I was super disappointed by them. They really didn't do enough output to be worth it at all, especially for their point cost. But I think here with Agrodons, the sweet spot is really 6, or at least 1 unit of 6, and then you might actually accompany it still with one other unit of 3, maybe, if you're running the Scarvet anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, unit of 6 is a sweet spot. Caleb, I imagine that you've run these guys a bunch.
I do. I love the Agrodons. They are fun. They pair very well now with the Scar Veteran on Agrodon. Yes. So it makes a very good drop to have the hero and these Agrodons that go along with it. Mm-hmm. So if you've got everything else in your general's regiment, or if somehow you manage to make the Scar Veteran on Agrodon your general, put these guys in it, you can. They take the priority target very well to give them the +1 to hit and wound. They take special assignment very well for a -1 to rend. So both of those work really good into this because they can usually get where they're going. In an army that we don't have a lot of heroes that buff things, these guys do have a hero that buffs them. Mm-hmm. And so they fixed it in the last Battle Scroll update FAQ thing to where the hero can give them 1 extra mount attack on the turn that he pops his once per game ability, but it also gives you a rage token. At the end of each turn, you start building up rage if they fought. So you want to kind of get these guys into combat. They don't mind eating a screen, if that is the only thing that they can charge. Eat that screen, force the opponent to charge you, and then you're already buffed up with extra mount attacks. That's probably not the best way to play it, but you do want these guys charging, and each one is going to have 6 attacks doing 2 damage each. They can hit very hard, and as the game keeps going, they should be getting better and better as you play. They're also a very good target to resurrect half of a unit of 6 from the Slaawn, and now you've got 3 of them back on the board. And they won't do near as much damage, obviously not reinforced, but they're still going to do enough. They have enough wounds. They're fast enough that they'll be useful as a tool to resurrect there. So Agrodons are very good, and it fills a role that Seraphon needs, which is that alpha striking heavy hammer unit, and that can be them.
Yeah, you've got the fast hammer, or the fastest hammer with the Raptidons, but they can't take any damage back. Then you've got the slow damage, but the biggest damage probably from the Croxigore, but they're just very slow. And then you got this middle piece that is almost, they made a Raptidon and Croxigore fusion, and that's the Agrodon Lancers. And they're sitting in that really nice sweet spot between them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Ryan.
If monsters ever become like meta again, these guys will be absolutely great because they do have anti-monster on their attack, which hasn't really come into play for me all that often. So their main weapon is attacking with -1 rend, but their mounts do have -2. So
yeah, if monsters become a thing, they're gonna rip them a new one.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Ryan, assignment time.
Yeah, here we go.
Let's see it.
So this was a 2-part assignment. The first was to completely cover the Agrodons, and the second was to ask that your research question was whether or not it's worth it to bring the their leader guy. What's it called? The
Scarvet on Agrodon.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with their output. This is if they're on Rage 0, and I'm going to do 1 for each of the rages. And then we're going to have base profile versus a monster, then on the charge, but not versus a monster, and then both. This is what you get. You can focus just on the expected value average if you like. So anyway, it's looking all right. A group of 3. Obviously, you can double it for 6 or almost double it. The champ attack wouldn't be included. Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the next one with 1 rage. So that's only bumping 1 attack up on the mounts. So it's already moving up. moving on up
About
in the
2
world.
damage.
Now, keep in mind, though, and this is something that I think it looks great to say we could get up to Rage 3, but the reality is you might not fight every turn that resets. And it has the same problem that the big pigs did in Iron Jaws with the momentum score. And so even though this looks really juicy, Caleb, I'm curious as to how often you're really sitting on Rage 3, especially if you're not using the boss. But let's get to Rage 3 first.
Yeah, not very often. It's not very often. They are a great counter charge unit. So if somebody's trying to avoid it to get that rage reset, they're a great unit to save a command point for to counter charge to keep them fighting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I like this unit a lot. So this is them at their max with all 4 of the normal buffs that they have access to. Obviously, there's other things you could stack on them. I'm ignoring all attack. I'm ignoring the whatever for the beast, which obviously would be one of the choices. But I'd probably still go with plus 2-inch move on these guys. I don't know, Caleb, if you're feeling the same way.
Yeah. Plus 2 move is good.
Yeah. So we're looking pretty good. Now let's go on to the next slide. The next slide is going to be our Scar Veteran. We're going to do the same thing for him, but I compressed his thing because he doesn't have against a monster buff. He's just got a charge buff. So what we're going to look at is 2 rage counts in 1 graph at a time. So this is with rage 0 or 1, first with base and then with charge. So you see it kind of like seesaws there a bit.
About half as good as the Agrodons.
Yeah, and he costs 180 and they cost 210 for 3. So what we're going to do, I'll tell you how I did my math on a minute here, but let's go to the next one for when he's on rage 2, 3. So, it's all right for what he is, sticking around. I wish he had a 3-up save. He looks like he could have a 3-up save, but, it is what it is. He doesn't have one, right? He's got a 4-up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, though. So this is, I kind of summarized the combo here. So 180 points for 1 hero instead of, when you do the math, is about 2.57 models of the other guys, okay? And Too Long didn't read. What I basically said was, let's take the difference in output that you would be sacrificing by swapping out one of these guys for 2.57 of those models, essentially. And how much his buff would have to do, how many models he would have to impact to have his buff end up paying back the output difference that we sacrificed by trading for it. Now, keep in mind, he's got other things on his war scroll. He also can take an artifact and a heroic trait. He also might be necessary to even get your guys in a regiment. So it's not exactly a fair thing, but if we're just looking at the output and the points you're paying, so we're looking at efficiency here. Mm-hmm. So we've already talked about the once per battle plus 1 rage for him and all Agrodons. Of course, that only maxes out at 3, right? So that's something to consider. The cool thing about that ability is it accelerates the process, because obviously it doesn't kick in, and it has to check for qualification at the end of the turn and doesn't kick in till the next time you get to fight. So he's accelerating the process, which is nice. So is it worth it? If we're looking at base profile, so none of the units charge. Let's say he didn't charge and the units he's fighting with didn't charge. He needs to be affecting at least 5 Agrodons to have gotten a positive net benefit. So we're talking about a unit of 6 with 1 dead or better, or 2 units of 3, or whatever you want to do. You need to have around 5 Agrodons to be impacted. And that's including his own buffing himself to get his points back or his output back. However, if you guys charged, which is obviously the default setting, you need roughly 14 Agrodons to be in the neighborhood for this guy to pay back what you sacrificed by giving up 180 points of Agrodons. That might seem kind of crazy, but they do so much more damage on the charge than what he's offering. And then my next point is here, that's only for 1 turn's worth of making up for lost output, because it's once per battle army. So you can't even stack this ability with multiple copies of this guy. And then in all the rest of the turns, including your opponent's turns or whichever turns you didn't pull the trigger, he's not making up for his output. So on a math level, he's not worth it. for that if you're saying, is he worth it for those things? But I already listed a number of reasons why you need a hero. You need a synergy piece that's buffing their move, all kinds of other reasons. But on a math level, I wouldn't say you should do it. Even with it 5 or more Agrodons, to just crack over the boundary of being worth it seems a little bit extreme. I could see where in a game with so few models in an army, you need to send some over to one flank, some over to another, and he's not always going to be around to give that buff to more than 5 Agrodons all that often, and it's a marginal buff at that if it's only 5 or 6. So Caleb, how does this line up with your experience of him, and does this math kind of feel like it holds true for your play experience thus far?
Absolutely. It's a hero that I will include if I need to. If I can fit them in, if I can fit my Agrodons in another way, I will. If I'm maxing for me, maxing Agrodons like 12 Agrodons, I might take him just because you'll probably need it for the list building purposes. But I do find it, if I can, Agrodons will fit into a Slan's regiment. And so a lot of times you don't need this hero. The fix they gave us in this last FAQ does help because, let's say you have the opportunity to double turn someone. Not that necessarily that's a good idea all the time, but you would essentially have these guys at rage 2 going into turn 2. At that point, you will have them on rage 3 in the opponent's turn. Hopefully they'll be wiped out if you've taken a double turn. But he's getting better. I still don't think he's quite there yet. Anytime you have a hero that buffs a specific unit and it's once per game, it better be good. It better be good. And this one, you're buffing, to be honest, the worst profile they have, because it's the companions and they're hitting on 4s and 3s, and so it's a fine hero if you need to take him, but it's not required to run your Agrodons with him.
Right. The one point that I should mention is I did not. There's a lot of calculations, as you saw, they had against a monster, whatever. I did not take Itzel into account, and I think to your point about what you just said, that it's buffing the worst of worser of the two characteristics. There, the profiles there. Obviously, in Itzel, they're getting a buff back to the monsters. And so I also didn't account for an all-out attack. If you started doing that, then he starts to get some of that points back, and it probably reduces the amount of Agrodons that need to be in the neighborhood to get his points back. But again, it's only one turn. It's only one turn's worth of output when you could have been doing it for all the fighting, and they want to fight every single turn. So, yeah.
I think what would really sell me on this guy is if he had the typical ability that you see on smaller heroes now, where they allow you to fight with a different unit right after they went. So if he would be able to fight, and then he would allow Agrodon Lancers to fight right, after him. So you would basically be Lumnet for a round or for an activation, and you would get to fight with 2 units. That would be super juicy, because yes, his damage output compared to Lancer isn't the best, so you would probably not bring him, but then you want him for your list building purposes. I mainly want him because I don't always want to put Agrodons with the Slan, because then they would be in General's regiment. Yeah. So there's that to consider. But as you mentioned, Caleb, he's getting better, but he's still not there. Okay, wow, Ryan, what an amazing job you did here. So many calculations. Would be interesting to include a screenshot of all your your files that you use for this.
It took me a minute to figure it out, and even then, still wants to double check all the math, but I had to do it kind of quickly. But I think it's at least in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think there are cases where if the stars align perfectly, you can have 1 million buffs on these Agrodons, and the damage will be sky high. Mm-hmm. I don't find that those usually line up very often.
Yeah.
And so look at these as something that you're gonna be shooting across the board, hopefully bunkering your opponent down in a turn. It's gonna take them a little while to kill them. They will get killed, and you'll bring half of them back as the opponent's trying to crawl out of their deployment zone.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun to do it that way. But they're useful all over the board, though, so you don't have to alpha strike.
And reinforced, keep in mind, guys, you don't actually have to keep them in coherency of 2 models. So with the size of their bases, they cover such a long distance. It's actually quite impressive if you line them up. Very scary.
Yeah.
But not a delete button. Though while I actually thought that they were, when I looked on paper, I was like, yeah, they'll probably delete something. When I want to delete something, I'm looking at two different units. And we're going to talk about them now. So the Raptidon Chargers, they were very good in the previous book. I think they're even better now. In your calculations, Caleb, for 3rd edition, they were your top scoring unit point for point, and they are once again that for 4th edition. You pay 140 for 5 models, and you get 6 attacks per model. Obviously, champion gets 7, 3 from the Lances and 3 from the Raptidon itself. They're pretty fast. They're 2 inches faster than normal Agrodons. They move 12. And they're, once again, very buffable. They are very good in big units. A big unit of 10 gives you 61 attacks, which is astounding. And small units are actually also fine because they're also cheap enough just to harass backline units. They're cheap enough to be a screen. I actually really like a unit of 5 or even 2 units of 5 added in or sprinkled on top of your list just to have some extra stuff going about. And as I mentioned, point for point, they're our best damage dealers. I really love these guys as a priority target. They're just so flimsy. They die to anything, but they will kill anything as well. Caleb, how's your experience been with the Raptidons?
I like the Raptidon Chargers. Yeah, you hit on that. They're a very versatile unit. You can either reinforce them or not, and they'll play different roles.
Yeah.
They also, one of their best abilities is that they're going to buff Kroxigor too. So don't forget about that. But they have 3 wounds each now, so they are a bit of a wound dense unit as far as cavalry goes. We see this a lot in cavalry now, going up to 3 wounds. Yeah.
Well, 30 health.
Yeah. And generally, they tend not to be the opponent's first target because we have other big things on the board too. And so I found a lot of times that, they're not the first thing taken out, and so they will have a chance to fight. They are very flimsy, though. On that 5-up save, they will die in droves. But they are cheap. They're cheap. They're fast. They have a lot of attacks. They do want to take some buffs, and this is a unit that I think if we had some heroes that could actually buff things very well, this unit could be extremely good.
Yeah.
Right now, they're kind of dependent, I feel like, on the priority target.
Yep.
Because their main weapon that they're wanting to attack with, it does hit on 4s and 4s, which isn't good. So if you can get priority target on them and get them into something in the General's Regiment, then that's where they're really going to shine. They do have enough dice to make up for that, even with the bad profiles. But if the worst case scenario is you get these guys stuck into combat and they're not charging, they don't have priority target, they won't do much damage at that point. So you do need to play them with a strategy in mind. If you don't want them reinforced, they make great screens. They make great objective grabbers. They can take the flanks. They can get into enemy's territory very well.
Yeah.
So they are a very versatile unit.
And such a good target for the Itzel the Tamer asterism.
For the companion.
Yeah, or is it not the Tamer? I think it is. For the companion weapon, crit to hits, because just the weight of dice on these guys is really good.
Because you're gonna have in a unit of 10, you're gonna have 30 attacks from the mounts. They're not very good attacks, but at this point, with this unit, you're just looking to roll a bunch of dice.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's the only unit in our book, index, that does that does damage that way.
Yeah.
Weight of dice, we don't have that.
I thought at one point this would be a great unit to do the Skink Star Priest on, but the auto wound ability, since they only have -1 rend, I never seem to get mileage out of it.
I did the same thing, and either I failed it or I was like, well, I had the buff on and it still did nothing.
Yeah. I have had a lot of great success with a unit of 10 Raptidon Chargers and a unit of Croxagore, the War Spawn.
Oh, wow.
And combo these two together, it's a lot of wounds, it's a lot of damage. Usually things cannot stand up to it. And that's enough wounds on the Raptidon Chargers that if you do get in a prolonged fight, they're not going to die, and the Croxagore will end up wiping out whatever they're in combat with. So
yeah,
I've had a lot of fun.
The price tag is actually quite reasonable for the models that you get and the damage that you get. It's pretty good.
Absolutely.
Once again, Ryan, we've got this routine here now. Which assigns did I give you this time?
This was to see if pairing them with the hunters is worth it.
Yes, I'm super excited to see this, because just as some extra info here, I've not actually looked at the stats in depth either, so I'm as surprised as you guys sometimes might be. So let's look at them.
All right, so this will be just 5 of the Chargers. This fits on one slide. So we've got them on the charge with the Riders +1 damage. With the Hunter's buff, so for those that don't know, if you take the other unit, the more shooty unit, if they ended up targeting, they don't even have to wounded anything or whatever, or even have hit it. They just had to target a unit within the unit that these guys are going into, then you get +1 to hit, of course, just for the Riders. And then if you get Hunters and the charge off, then you're getting what you see there. The output, I scaled it again to what we saw, just to keep everything consistent with the Agrodons, so that you know they're not doing Agrodon numbers. But to Caleb's point, I also run against my metric is per 100 points worth of expenditure, and these guys, unless the Agrodons are getting on to about Rage 2 or getting some more buffs off, these guys do perform better point for point. So especially if they get the charge off. I will say a caveat there is because they only have a health characteristic of 3 and we're in a cavalry heavy meta right now, there's a good chance they won't get to power through, which means that they will also get stuck in combat and have less likely of a chance to charge the next turn, whereas the Lancers with a wounds characteristic or health characteristic of 5 have a better chance of pulling that off and then get to be free the next turn to guarantee the charge. But anyway, let's move on to the next slide there. So here's the Hunters, the non-melee version. This is their ranged, and the range is actually not bad when they get the Chargers combo off, because they like to pair off of each other. It's not great. This is not a shooting army, but it's still something. And that's the orange there. So they're getting to shoot twice, basically, on a turn. You could even do it in your opponent's turn by paying for covering fire, right? You could get the full combo for covering fire and counter charge, and then you get to do it. So it's just a lot of CPs to be blowing, but it could happen. And then their melee is not particularly amazing. Now, let's move on to the next slide. So, all right. So I just looked. They're at the same points value. So this is a calculation for efficiency's sake. So I ranked them in terms of what has the best average output in combination. So if we take one of each type, so Hunters and Chargers, without the charge getting off on the Chargers, so we're just looking at the base condition, that's the worst one of the group. You need to get that charge off to start really seeing the improvement on the Chargers. It's in the name, you know. If you take just 2 Chargers units and they're just on their base, so they don't get the charge off, then they're at the second best performance out of the 4 possibilities here. If you're doing one of each type, but the Chargers do get to go off, then we're looking at about 13 expected value average. That's against all saves averaged out. But if you take 2 Chargers, which of course is the same points cost as taking one of each type, and they're on the charge, which is what they want to be doing, you can see that's the biggest jump of all the ones. So my personal advice would be, even though it's a fun combo and it could have some utility maybe for sniping something, I would probably be more inclined to just say go with full Chargers. So is that lining up with your experience, Caleb?
Yeah, I don't even have any of the Hunters built, just because I don't think they're worth it. I think there is a very small strategy where you reinforce both a unit of Chargers and a unit of Hunters, and that actually does turn into some decent damage in the shooting phase, because you will get to shoot normal shooting, and then once the chargers charge, you can shoot the hunters again. But in practice, it's very hard to get 20 cavalry models within 12 inches of an enemy. So
That's
it's
the thing, right?
yeah. So it's very hard to play them that way, and it takes a lot of setup and all the perfect situations. It can be worthwhile that way, but in practice, I think you're going to go chargers over hunters every time.
Yeah.
So, question: if the buff was +1 to wound instead of +1 to hit, because you could always do an all-out attack on the chargers, right? I think maybe then I would be convinced, because then you're looking at with an all-out attack stacked on there, you're looking at 3s and 3s. And because the buffs are, benefiting each other in a good way there. And then the all-out attack would also be raising the output of the steeds, if you will, the raptidons, up to 3s and 3s and 3s. And then, of course, if you had Itzel for some reason, then you're functionally feeling like 2s and 3s. I feel like that could be a combo, but they missed the wrong buff, I feel. If it was +1 to wound, it would make such a big difference, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. They want these two units to play together, and they just haven't figured it out yet. But something like that would be perfect. That would be fun to play around with, because it's a combo that wants to happen, but they can't get the right rules for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they just need to reduce the the price on or something. Pull them down to 120 or something, maybe. I don't know. All right, well, that's my analysis. What, Jonas? Any surprises there?
No, I mean, Caleb made an entire video about what the best shooting units in Seraphon are, and the hunters came out on top, but the results were disappointing, to say the least. So it's fully what I expected.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for this chart, though. I really, this sums it up so nicely. It's very nice. Thank you.
Happy to do it. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna pick up the pace a little bit, Caleb, because I think we had about 3 hours to do the recording, and we're 2.5 hours in.
Sure.
Croxigore, we're kind of cheating here with the Warscrolls. Usually it doesn't take that long for us to cover 6 Warscrolls, but we're always covering double ones almost. So with the Croxigore, again, we're cheating a little bit because we're gonna cover the War Spawn as well. So 220 for 3 normal Croxigore, 6 health apiece, which is very, very good. And they are so good against infantry. I mean, you can see it on paper, but just watch it happen in real time. It's even better than you think. It's so strong. Just 3 of these is enough to wipe a lot of basic infantry units. And they're very tough to kill. So MSU, this unit can really go hunt flanks and hunt the backfields. The cool thing about these guys is once you get them into combat, so you're done with all your movement stuff, they really don't require any help. The Warspawn do a little bit with the Skinks, obviously, but the normal Croxigore, they're just send them off on their own. Your opponent's not going to be bothered about 3, because he's going to have to deal with 10 Chargers, and he's going to have to deal with 6 Agrodons. But then those Croxigore, they're going to do some work for you, especially when the big units are fighting already, and they're just going off on their own, slapping the smaller guys. They're really good with all-out attacks, so you can imagine they're even better with priority targets. The only reason why I don't really like to put priority target on the Croxigore necessarily is because they're so slow. And you're not always guaranteed that you're going to get them into combat, whereas with the Agrodons, it's more of a guarantee, I guess. But I say so slow, but with Sotek the Deliver, they're up to movement 7, and then speed of 1 shave for the run. I mean, we talked about this before. 13 inches if you wanted to, and then the 2d6 charge, so still pretty good. But I do feel, Caleb, I'm not sure whether you would agree, I think at the start of 4th edition, when the indexes just came out, everyone was on the normal Croxigore train, and everyone's like, yeah, Warspawn are okay, but normal Crocs are probably better. But now I see this transition, and I also actually saw this in your list as well. You see this transition towards 6 Warspawn Croxigore as well?
Yeah, I think for me, it has been easier to get the +1 damage on the War Spawn than this unit of Kroxigor here for the infantry ones.
Yeah, I would agree.
They both hold a wildly different role. I think if you're going to reinforce the Kroxigor, a unit of Kroxigor, you're going to reinforce the War Spawn. If you're going to run them as a unit of 3, I think you do take these normal ones because they are good against infantry, and there's a lot of infantry in the game. So they do get the bonus Ren versus infantry. If they happen to face 10 or more models in the unit, then they'll get that +1 damage. There are a lot of those units, but not quite as much as just regular infantry. The thing about the War Spawn is you can guarantee the extra damage. So it's not reliant on what you're facing. It's not reliant on how many models are in the enemy unit. You can make sure you get that +1 damage.
Yeah, because of the wraparounds, because of the Hunters of Wanshi movement with the Shadow Strike, Star Hosts, and such, right?
Yeah. It's up to you. It's not up to whatever the opponent decided to bring in this list. So I think that's why they end up being just a little bit more useful in every circumstance. But Kroxigor are great. Both varieties, I like both of them. They do have a lot of health. They tend to stay alive longer than what people think with that 6 health each, and they'll hit hard. And they don't require that many buffs. Nope. I think you mentioned that.
Yep.
Generally, all I'm looking to put on them is all-out attack.
Yes.
If they're a unit that needs it, then I'm going to give them all-out attack. Their big weapon is going to be hitting on 2s and 2s. The normal weapons are going to be hitting on 3s and 2s. It's fantastic. So a very good War Scroll that doesn't need a lot of help to make them function.
And such a nice globe from the previous book where they were meh at best. And they had such amazing sculpts, and I bought them immediately. I was like, oh, I can't really use these guys because they feel so useless.
Yeah. I have tried to build like a Kroxigor heavy list, and I don't think that's their role. Just not enough movement.
No.
You can get one unit moving pretty fast usually.
Yeah.
But I think they play a role as that second line of attack. So you have your cavalry that's going out, and then let's say you've dealt with that cavalry. I'm bringing half of them back anyway, but here's a full unit of Kroxigor that you have to deal with now. Yeah. And so it's very good.
Yeah, also an amazing unit to return half of. With
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, following the pattern, assignment time, Ryan. I asked you to do the comparison between normal Crocs and the War Spawn, right?
It's real simple. We can just do it real fast.
Yeah.
So they both have the same output, but they have different conditions. And they cost the same thing. So it's real simple. The condition differences are how they what they get +1 rend and how they get their damage, their +1 damage. The regular Kroxigor, I really wish they'd given them a different, so you don't have to say Kroxigor which one is against infantry, and the War Spawn is against monsters. I don't know how much of a monster meta we're in, so I'm already leaning more toward Kroxigor that way, the non-War Spawn. And then +1 damage is what you're getting with regular Kroxigor against a unit of 10 or more, which could be usually infantry. So you're usually getting both, but it could be like a big block of cav, which we are seeing a lot of. So they're even useful into a cav meta. And then getting both is going to be your default setting against infantry blocks. And like Caleb said, they're just doing a crazy amount of work. For the War Spawn, the only way you're getting that +1 damage is, again, that synergy with the skinks that have to be in combat nearby, so they get extra pissed if they got to protect their skink buddies. But I just don't know how often those skinks are surviving. And then if they kill the skinks first, Caleb, doesn't that mean the damage thing falls off because it's a passive ability?
Yes. So they're no longer in combat, so you'd lose it. Yep.
Yeah, so that's the rough thing. If it was like it triggered in the combat ability stage and then it got remembered for the rest of the combat phase, even if the skinks die, I might be a little bit more convinced by it. But again, I don't have anything against the War Spawn, especially if we go into a monster meta. But with what I said about infantry clearing big blocks, and then also going against sometimes big 10-man units of cavalry, I really feel like I'd go for the regular Kroxigor personally. But I think it's a matter of taste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Perfect. That was indeed quite quick. And then our last pick here is the Hunters of Fuwanshi, and they might not appear impressive because they're not there for damage. They're there for everything else. They're probably actually the reason why you will win your games, to be honest. Caleb, I emailed you and asked you which last unit you wanted to add to the Warscroll breakdowns. I had already selected the previous 5, and you went with the Hunters of Wanshi. Do you want to cover why you thought they deserved this spot?
Yeah, this is a unit you will see in just about every single competitive Seraphon list.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have 90 points, if you only have 80, take the cheaper ones. Either one is going to be good. This one is better though. But what Hunters of Wanshi do is they are not deployed on the table. They're set up in reserves. Then you can bring them down in your movement phase. So what this does is it opens up the backfield of the opponent's territory to this unit. You can bring them down to score battle tactics. You can bring them down to score objectives. And all of that is worth 90 points. Just being able to bring a unit down out of reserves is worth 90 points. We see a lot of armies pay about 90 to 100 points for that ability. Mm-hmm. What makes this unit even better is they have an ability where if you target a unit with its shooting ability, which its shooting profile is 10 inches, so that's perfect. That's within range of where you're going to ambush. If you target a unit, you don't even have to do damage to it. If you just target it on a 3-up, you reduce their charge rolls by 1 until the start of your next turn. So it is a very good ability that will debuff an opponent's fast unit. It'll debuff their unit that is their heavy hitter. Whatever you're kind of scared about getting hit by, you're gonna try to target with this. So it plays multiple different roles. In a lot of lists, you'll see 2, sometimes even 3 of these units.
Yep.
Because you can throw that ability on multiple units. If they have 2 big hammers in their army and you hit both of those 3-up rolls, and now they're both at -1 to their charge dice, they're probably not going to get into you. So a very good ability. Another thing that is interesting, this ability goes off in any shooting phase. So anytime that you want to cover fire with these guys, there's not a lot to cover fire with in Seraphon. This is a unit that you could cover fire with. They're not going to do any damage, but that doesn't matter because you're just looking to roll that 3-up ability. And if somebody's going to come try to destroy this unit, you cover fire. Now they have 1 less dice to roll. Even if they're right outside of 3, their charge is going to be difficult. So a very useful unit, and one of our ways to kind of really debuff the opponent. We don't have a whole lot of those, and this is a good one. So great unit. Get these guys, put them in your list. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't even know how much damage they do, to be honest. I haven't ever run the numbers because I know it's terrible.
Yeah,
that's not what they're there for. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a verse. Oh, sorry, Ryan?
No, it's fine. I've got the numbers. So that'll be on the next slide.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's such a versatile unit, and besides Raptidon Chargers, they are just so good for completing the battle tactics because your Agrodons and your Kruxgore really don't have time to complete battle tactics for you, at least not on the flanks, and you don't want to throw away that many points for a turn to go to the flanks or capture a terrain piece. These units, they don't cost a lot. You can throw them away if you wanted to. I also really like these as a screen, to be honest. You drop them in front of your units, not necessarily to block damage, but as you mentioned, Caleb, with covering fire, you're really reducing the distance that your opponent's going to be able to roll with their charge. I mean, even from a 3-inch distance, it's only 66% chance for your opponent to get into combat with you. So that's still pretty cool. Not considering the fact that you might be blocking off their movement a little bit with the hunters themselves. So really
Absolutely.
Good units. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Damage time.
It's easy. Both types are on one chart here. I assumed we were talking about the bolas and not the darts, but
Correct.
I put the darts on here too.
Yeah.
So the bolas arranged are in blue, and then the next column is going to be the darts range. So you can see the darts are your shooters at the end of the day. But in melee, the bolas do way more, and then the darts are doing pretty much nothing. So anyway, So there you go. But obviously, it's the deep strike. That's what we're doing. So
Yeah,
there we go. In the interest of time.
You can, and I have comboed up both units before, where you take the bolas to reduce their charge, and you take darts to reduce their melee, or their wound rolls in melee, and I think it lasts until the next turn. Yeah. No, it's only for the rest of the turn. Oh, never mind. That's not nearly as good for some reason. But I have comboed them up before just because I needed the points, and you do have 2 different debuffs available at you. But yeah, don't take them for damage.
Yeah,
take them for scoring points. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we got this one as well, Ryan.
So I'm just going to plow through this real quick. So this is just for those that haven't seen the list of heroes that we can take, and let's move on to the next one. And here's the list of units. And remember, units in this sense does not mean like heroes are still units in the game. They are considered just heroes. All right, let's move on to the next list. So this, if anyone saw my list building video, I kind of broke everything down into categories. So I'll just cover it real quick here. We have no unlimited units in the army. An unlimited would be a unit that can be taken by any or by all heroes. That just doesn't work out this way. Italics heroes would be the kind that can be taken in another hero's regiment. That would be limited just the Astrolith bearer. I should have put a space in between bearer can. He's a bearer can now. He can be taken 0 to 1 by all Slann and Saurus heroes, so not Skinks. And a Skink Star Priest can be taken as 0 to 1 by both Slann. War Master types, for lack of a better term, they are the types that can take the whole army. It turns out both of the Slann are War Masters, and they're the ones that can do that. Restricted units, so monsters such as Bastildons twice, the Engine of the Gods, Stegodon, and some beasts like Terror Wings and Spawn of Chotek can be taken as 0 to 1 in mixed combinations by a certain number of heroes. It's too much to write out. We've also got any Skink Cavalry can be taken by the 2 Flying Chiefs, if you will. Any Saurus is by the Astrolith Bearer, the Old Bloods, of which we have 2, and the Scarvets, of which we have 2. Any monster would be just by the Old Blood Carnosaur, so that would be another way we could build that Bastillodon list.
Yeah.
And then any Croxagore and or non-monster Skink can be taken by any of the non-flying Skink heroes, because the flying ones are the Ripperdactyl and Pterodon Chiefs. So there it is. Caleb, did I miss anything?
That looks good.
Cool.
All right.
Let's do it. Let's do some lists.
List time. So, Caleb, I put this one first because it's probably, out of the 3 lists that we've got here, it's probably the one that you're gonna see the most variations of. Oh, I left 10 Croxigore Warspawn in there. It's obviously 6 Croxigore Warspawn. That would be amazing. But it's become almost a sort of staple, I wouldn't say, but like the value list, right? That's why I call it Seraphon value. It's like all of the good stuff is in there. Take us through it if you want.
This one is a 3-drop. Now, maybe you're looking at that and going, 3-drop, what are you doing? I don't mind going first with this one. I've got things I can do with that, and so that's why I'm going 3-drop. I wanted to get as little into my general's regiment as possible, and that's a little hard to do with Seraphon if you're trying to play that game because of the Slann. If you take him, which you will a lot, he's going to be your general. So, and he's the one that opens up most units. So that's the reason for 3-drop, not any other kind of limitation there. Not because I really want the Scarvetter on Agrodon, but he does play a role. So we are in Sunclaw. I kind of wanted to maximize some Saurus and Croxagore in this list, so they'll be able to do their pile-ins and extra mortal wounds. We do have our Celestial Manipulation lore for the Speed of Wanche run and charge, and Morbid Conjuration for our endless spells casting from the Slann. So, or Starseer, also plenty of spell casts. Our Slann is our general with our 10 Saurus guard in that regiment. In this type of setup, I generally make them the bodyguard, so that anybody that's going to come try to attack those Saurus guard, they're going to be on a 3-up, 5-up with -1 attack. So it ends up being very hard unit to shift. Quite a few wounds, and they're not bad in combat. They can hit back if they need to. So a nice little home objective holder unit there that's going to be casting my spells. 5 Hunters of Wanche with bolas. My next regiment is a Scar Veteran Agrodon with Beastmaster, so he's going faster with those Agrodons. And all 3 of these regiments can kind of operate on their own. So it makes very easy for deployment. You know, smooth brain. We're just putting these regiments down at the same time, together as what you're doing. So Scarvet on Agrodon goes with the Agrodon Lancers. They can be your mobile piece. They're going to be going fast and hitting hard. So Beastmaster gives them the extra movement along with an asterism.
Mm-hmm.
Second regiment there is the Skink Starseer, and I'm taking my Kotal Familiar to give the extra D6 cast. And I find I like that on my Starseer so that I can cast his spell, his Warscroll spell, to remove wards. So that's my important spell to cast there. I find not to need as much healing on the other units. Slann is usually fairly protected with the 5-up ward from the guard.
Yeah.
He'll still die sometimes, but you got other threats that I like the Kotal
Especially
Familiar
with a
on Starseer.
bodyguard on, it's not easy to kill.
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, true. Yes, we do have 6 Croxagore Warspawn there, and they'll be kind of sticking around with that Starseer. One thing that you can happen if somebody does charge your Croxagore Warspawn, try to line up your Skink Starseer to where they'll be a millimeter inside 3 inches from wherever they charge, so that the Croxagore Warspawn will get the buff for extra damage from that Starseer because he is infantry. So that will help there some. We also have another unit of Hunters and some Raptidon Chargers to just help score the board, be screens, help proc that Croxagore Warspawn ability as needed. So you do have a lot of drops that comes in at exactly 2,000 points, but I feel like it's a pretty flexible list. You have your Anvil there with the Source Guard and Slann. You have your Alpha Strike with the Agrodons if you need it, and you got your Croxagore to play midboard. And then your Raptidon Chargers and Hunters to score objectives as needed.
Yeah, really.
That's kind of the idea behind that one.
Yeah, clean list. I love it. I played
And you could very easily switch battle formation over to the Skink with the Shadow Strike, and it's still useful because you're going to use that on the Skink units here in this list.
I was just
going to
say I played a very similar list, and the biggest change is that I went with Shadow Strike. And I had more Raptidons and less Croxagore. But
yeah. I just don't want to. I don't want to submit 2 Shadow Strike lists. So I made this one Sunclaw.
Yeah. I could see the thinking, but I love it as a Sunclaw list as well. It's really strong. I think if you wanna see, that's what I love about the new Seraphon index right now. It's not one of the 2 playstyles. It's a little bit of both. You have the casters, you have the Croxagore, you have the Lancers. It's a whole lot of melee though, and it's very very honest damage, predictable in a way as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, fun. And if you're just starting off, I think this list by you, Caleb, is a very good place to start, because all of these units have a lot of value. I am a little bit afraid of how the points will maybe change in the future, because if Seraphon will increase in points, and I don't think they will, it'll be one of these units. And I think the only units that might go up in points are the Bolas, the Hunters of Warranty.
If you needed to flex this list a little bit, you could easily pop the Agrodons into the General's Regiment and just get rid of the Scar Veteran on Agrodon. That would reduce your drops. That would give you, if you wanted to, a priority target or a special assignment for the Agrodons, and you could have some points to play with there if you wanted to. So
I understand why you did it separately though, because at least they won't get priority targeted now.
Sure.
Cool. Only thing that I wanted to note here is that keep in mind, if you're bodyguarding the Source Guard, your Slann actually has to be in combat for them to get the bodyguards -1 attack to attacking units.
Yes. It gets a little risky there, but that's kind of like the hopefully it just keeps them off of the guard as long as possible. So
because guard
remember
really
these are bodyguard.
We haven't talked about them a whole lot, but they're actually very strong, and with priority targets they're really cool as well. 3 attacks, 2 hit, 2 wound, then pretty good.
Not a bad unit.
Okay, then we're moving on to a more memey list by me, and then a really cool list by you again to close the lists off. I figured it'd be good to interrupt your cooler list with my meme list. So I've got a Croak list, not because I strongly believe in the Croak list, but just because I thought that I couldn't really make 3 lists or have 3 Seraphon lists without one with Croak in it. So what did I bring here? Mine is also a 3-drop, but that's mainly because of the Regiment of Renown that I have here. So I've got Croak with Lancers and Saurus Guards. The idea here is that as we found out during the Warscroll breakdown, Croak is actually gonna be moving up now. We're not castling with this list at all. As you can see, everything is moving, everything is fast. So Croak, the Stars here, and the Saurus Guard are moving up either on the sides or the middle, and your Agrodons and your Raptidons are gonna form, your other flankers or your other sites of damage or your distraction pieces, depending on what you need. Speaking of distraction, I've also added Callus and Tall into the army list, mainly because they're disgustingly underpriced. I think I could see them go up by as much as 80 points, and they would still be probably pretty good. Why are there?
Tell me a little bit about Callus and Toll, because I've seen that pop up in a few lists. And
Okay.
To be honest, I haven't really looked at them all that much.
Okay, that's great. That's great. They are on a 4-up save and a 5-up ward, I think. They teleport in a little bit like the Hunters of Wanche. The cool thing is that once they're contesting an objective, not controlling, but contesting an objective, their save is improved by 1, and their ward save is also improved by 1. So all of a sudden, you drop this unit on an objective, or you charge them in. You don't actually have to control it. Their save is improving from a 4 to a 3-up, and from a 5-up to a 4-up ward. Really nasty unit. You got a bunch of wounds, and then we're not even talking about their damage output, Caleb, because they are very strong against endless spells and wizards, and as you know, there's a lot of them around right now. And both their ranged weapons and I think also their melee weapons actually are affecting the wizards and the spells. So they're just a very good hunter unit. They do a little bit they covered a little bit of the same ground as the Hunters of Awanshi, but compared to the Hunters, they actually can tank a lot of stuff, and your opponent will have to dedicate a lot of resources if you drop them in the back line somewhere. So nice. That was my idea, where you're moving up with Croak. Your opponent's probably going like, I want to dedicate resources into Croak, but I've also got these Wizard Hunters in my back line, and then we've got the Agrodons and the Raptidons on the flanks moving up very fast. And then all of a sudden, there's Hunters of Wanshi with bolas reducing your charge distance. I mean, there's a lot going on, and that's not even talking about the Morbid Conjuration spells that you can throw out to protect Croak. So, yeah, I think if you want to make Croak work, you just have to have enough distractions.
Make it to where the opponent can't put much damage into him.
Yeah. Or they put a lot of damage into him, maybe, and then you're saving your other units for a full turn. That's also a thing.
Sure.
Do I strongly believe that this list is good? No. But I do think if you want to have Croak do something, I think this might actually be one of your better shots at it. Also, keep in mind it's only 1940 points, so you get a free command point in your first round, which is always nice.
Nice.
Okay. Any thoughts by either you or Ryan?
I love that you got Callus and Toll, and then that's pretty fun. If you had more points, I'd say put Neve in there. But
I really considered it, but then I had to drop a big unit, and there was really nothing that I could drop without hurting the list too much.
Fair.
But Neve is also very strong, and she's so interesting here as well, because she would fill almost a role of 6 Agrodons by herself. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she's crazy. If you haven't given her a shot, Caleb, but you're interested in buying a new unit, definitely give Neve a chance to prove herself.
Yeah, I need to look into some of these regiments of rounds. I haven't really given them much thought yet.
Yeah, Callus and Toll, I'm inclined to say don't buy them, because I just think they're gonna get such a price bump at some point that they're probably not gonna be good anymore. But Neve sits at a pretty good price tag, I feel, and her Warscrolls. The Warscrolls that you get from her units are really good. So yeah,
cool.
I think Ryan, if you wanted to check it out, Caleb, or any of the listeners or reviewers, Ryan made a video, an Idoneth Deepkin breakdown video, and I think it was the last one, Ryan.
That's correct, about the infantry people. And then Lorai's in there with Neve, and so I covered it a little
and Laura
bit.
is an IDNF mage that's in her regiment.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Nice.
Let's do that last list.
Yeah. So this one is again by you, Caleb, and I call it a Need for Speed because everything moves fast, except for again 10 Croxicores. I'm so bummed that I left that typo in there. Okay, anyway, take the lead here. You did not include an artifact and a trait, so I put Codal Familiar, but you might want to swap that to the stars here and just tell me what trait you wanted for these guys.
It would have been Beastmaster.
Figured,
it would have been Beastmaster. Yeah. So this one is a very skink heavy list. But I think what the difference here is going to be the Ripperdactyl Riders. We'll kind of focus on those a little bit. I do like the unit. It is kind of fun. So Shadow Strike, Star Host to get the extra movement for the skink units. Celestial Manipulation and Morbid Conjuration. No big surprise there. Our General's Regiment is a Slan. In that General's Regiment is 10 Source Guard, 10 Raptidon Chargers, 10 Raptidon Hunters. This is just kind of going off the idea of I want some shooting. I don't want to totally ignore the shooting phase in the game. And so our best shooting is from these hunters. It's not great, but you can do some decent damage once you get them buffed up. Give them priority target. Let them shoot twice because you're charging in the chargers. And at that point, I think they start making up for what they cost. Yeah. Don't break down that cost, and then I'll just feel depressed. But I do. It does seem like it does some damage on paper there, so I'll have to try it out on the table at some point. But 5 Hunters of Huache there, of course, and then the second regiment is Starseer, some 6 Croxigore Warspawn,
3
and
Rippers.
then the 5 Rippers and 5 Rippers.
Yeah, 3 Rippers and 3 Rippers.
Oh yeah, 3. Yeah. I got you. The Ripperdactyl Riders, I do think they have a role. They can be good screens. They are incredibly fast. They move 14 inches base, and they fly. So that's really good for getting over, across terrain, across units, all this kind of stuff. They're not going to kill a bunch. They'll kill off some small flanker units maybe if you put the bloat toad on those units. But really, they're just that utility piece. They're incredibly fast. They can start on the board, so that gives you a little bit more flexibility if you need screens, if you need something out on the flanks to grab, take the flanks. So I do like Ripperdactyls. They are a pretty fun unit because they're so fast. If you start them in range of Beastmaster and you're taking the Asterism, now they're moving 18 inches and they fly. So throw a run on them, and you're going to get them anywhere on the board. So they're a fun unit there. Probably the weakness of this list is probably the Raptidon Hunters, but in the end, you're only paying 240 points for them. So you are getting some use out of shooting. They're not worth covering fire, so don't worry about covering fire. They're not worth it there, but they are worth shooting them on the charge with the chargers, so you get that double shot. And you can make some play with them there.
Yeah. What honor guard ability are you using here?
It would be the priority target with Raptidon Hunters is what you'd have to do. So you give up the chargers having that.
Yeah.
But they're going to get +1 to hit anyway because of the Hunter's ability. So you want that +1 to hit and wound on the shooting for the Hunters because they're going to be shooting twice. And I think if I remember my numbers correctly, they're going to be doing like 18, 19 damage versus a 4-up save with their 2 shooting attacks combined.
Mm-hmm.
So it's enough to put a pretty good hurt on something before you hit them with the chargers.
Yeah.
And so that combo I think does work, but you got to line it up, and it's pretty close range, 12-inch shots. So it takes a skilled player to run it. That's probably why I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, that being said, I really like how different this list is from what we've seen from other competitive lists, because I gotta say, once you start looking at the competitive lists, it's like just 5 or 6 units in different quantities, and nothing else from the book gets used.
Yeah. They seem very similar.
Yeah.
A lot of the top tier lists, and even at that, there's not a whole lot of 5-0 lists for Seraphon. I haven't noticed any recently. So there's plenty of people going 4-1, a handful, and so the army can do well there. But I don't think I've seen one win a tournament, like a major tournament, in a while.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, pretty cool list. So just once again, guys, 6 Croxigore and 3 Riperdactyls, not 5. I actually have these guys in my build box, but I haven't put them together. So I was like, I think it's 5 of them. And while I was looking at it and not under time pressure, I was like, maybe it's actually just 3. So I just checked and it's 3. Yeah. But
this is one of those units that, like, if you send it out and it gets killed and you have nothing else to bring back from Slon,
yeah,
okay, you're bringing 2 Riperdactyls back. They're still going to play the board, and you've essentially only lost 1 Riperdactyl from that unit. So
I wonder whether it's safer to swap your chargers with one of the rider units, just so that they're not going to get priority targeted.
Good point. Yeah.
Because they will often, take the brunt of an attack, right? So I could see that as a small adjustment, but other than that, really cool list. I wish I had the models to play this.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely looks like the kind of list I would be interested in.
Yeah. Exactly.
Caleb, if I could ask a kind of summary question, we're going to up into the conclusions, but how has your list writing changed in the 2 months that we've had the edition out thus far? Like, because you've obviously made a number of videos. Now you're a couple months into it. What are you thinking now? What's changed? What have you learned? That kind of stuff.
I think I've had to adjust my thinking on what this army is. So, it's not a shooting army. It's not a magical domination army. It's a board control and melee army, but it's not the best at either one of those. And so it doesn't feel like it has a role that just really sticks out from anything else. So I think it comes down to player skill, probably, and that leaves it up to looking at what some of these best units are and how can you best play them. Because nothing in this army is spammable. This isn't going to be, I'm going to build all one unit and just spam it on the board and it's gonna win me games. It's not that way. You do have to get your reps in. You do have to learn what it can and can't do. So what has my list building changed? I think I've slowly gone more and more board control as I've realized I'm not going to out melee the melee armies. It has good melee. Don't get me wrong. It does. It has good movement, but other armies have better movement.
Yeah.
So other armies have better melee. So it's kind of just a middle of the road army where you've got to be prepared for everything going in. So you can't go all Agrodons. You can't go all Croxigore and expect to win more games than you lose. So definitely look for things that can score you battle tactics, that can keep you on the board, controlling objectives. So.
Nice. Cool.
Okay. Let's close off with some, just final topics here. Caleb, are you okay for another 10 minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So let's quickly talk internal and external balance. I mean, you just touched on it a little bit, Caleb. I feel like our book is internally, as you mentioned, you have to bring a mix of units, which I always love. That being said, I feel like the mix is always the same mix, as I mentioned before. And externally, I do feel like we're on the lower end of competitiveness, which I'm okay with. It's just that it's super, super fair. And to be honest, I feel like we're almost solely playing in 2 phases. We're playing in the movement phase a whole bunch, and we're playing in the combat phase a whole bunch. But our hero phase is not as impressive as it was before. Sure, we have the quantity of spell cast, but the spells are actually not as juicy. We have basically no shooting. So it makes for a very predictable army. And I think if it gets played enough, you start to realize if I block that spell there and if I wall off that point there, it's pretty easy to counter. So I do feel like it's a very nice army to pick up because you get to slowly learn the game, and it's also nice to play against beginners because it's not super overwhelming, as in not bursty. But I do feel like there's some fixing that they could do, mainly in the shooting phase, to make it a little bit more widely playable, as in more phases. Would you agree with those statements?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right on there.
Yeah. How are you feeling so far about the games that you've played? Have you won a whole lot, or?
I think I'm probably about even, maybe across everything in the super competitive games that I've played. I think I've probably lost more than I've won.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody's scared of Seraphon at the moment.
Yeah.
There's no real trick that they've got, that Seraphon's got, that anybody else doesn't have, that you're saying watch out for this because they're gonna hit you this way.
Yeah.
It's fast, but I mean, I guess maybe it's a curse of I play against Stormcast so much, and he's so much faster than me, so I don't even win that battle, and he's got shooting.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as internal external balance, I think internal, I do think we need to see some of our units brought up a little bit. I don't think we have anything that's overpowered that needs to be wholly corrected. There's a few points that could go up on certain units. That'd be fine. But we are in that same type of curse where we have so many units in our book that there's always going to be units that just are unplayable. I would love to have some of these monsters brought up to where they were a terror on the table, but at the moment they're not. So I think there is some work to do there. Hopefully that will all be fixed whenever we get a battle tome. If Skaven's battle tome is any outlook on what battle tomes may look like, it may not change a whole lot. I still think we're playable, though. I think it's a fine army. I think you can go to a tournament and you could win go 3-2 pretty easily, and I think have a good time. So
yeah, I think that's a great synopsis. Yeah.
Impact on it. Oh, I was gonna say impact on the meta. I don't know that Seraphon really has much of an impact on the meta.
Exactly.
I don't think it does. We used to. People would be terrified of our spellcasting, but I don't think so. Not anymore. Bring a couple screens. That'll stop our biggest threats, and if you have some shooting or some melee that can get to us first or fight first type of stuff, then that can -1 to hit really hurts us. Because most of our big heavy things, a lot of them hit on 4s. So if you can reduce that down, that'll hurt us.
Yeah. I think if I could change one thing is that I would just like to see the monsters be more viable, as you mentioned. I'm okay with Croak sitting out for a while because it's been such a staple for such a long time, and it was really a nightmare on the table for a lot of armies. And Games Workshop usually makes a point of paying for the sins of the past, so I can see that there. But I just don't understand why the monsters need to be this weak in an army that's really focused on you get your big dinos. That being said, I'm actually okay with them being middle of the pack right now, not top competitive, because usually the armies that are top competitive, I'm fearful for Lumineth right now, even though I do understand why they would deserve it. But the results at the start of a new edition are usually so skewed that the top armies get hammered stronger than they should be with the nerf bats. At least that used to be the case. They're getting better at balancing stuff. So I'm actually okay with Seraphon sitting in the middle. I feel like the sad thing is that I don't feel like them as I feel about Sylvaneth, for example. They're also not doing great, but there's so much hidden tech still hidden or still in Sylvaneth. There's so much stuff that can surprise opponents. I do feel like with some small adjustments, they're going to get there. While with Seraphon, it's more like you need to completely rewrites spell lores or star hosts or certain Warscrolls just to see them on the table.
Sure.
So it's interesting there. And as you make such a good point that everything we do, at least some armies do everything at least a little bit better. So we're not winning any prizes in any department except for the fact that we look cool as hell on the table.
That's true.
Yeah. And I think it's an awesome army to play. It looks great and it feels very, very fun to just build whatever you want to build now compared to the
Absolutely.
split play styles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ryan, just to get your final thoughts here before we end the video, you don't play Seraphon. Do you play against it often?
I played against it enough to be frustrated that I've said for a long time that it had none of the.
Sorry, go ahead.
And
go again.
I've said for a long time that it had all the tools and none of the drawbacks.
Yeah.
It's nice to see it kind of just being somewhere in the middle of the pack now.
Mm-hmm.
That said, for the Calebs of the world, that Seraphon's like their thing. That's obviously a tough place to be in. But I do think it's a cool army. And for what it's worth, when I started playing Warhammer Fantasy again after being a kid and taking a break for a while, I picked up Lizardmen when they were new. And I just brought them back from my mom's basement this last time I was in the States. So,
nice.
So who knows? Maybe I've got some
you
old
do play Seraphon in a way.
I technically have Seraphon, yeah. So maybe there'll be a future where I'm getting back into it. So we'll have to see. Maybe this is the dawn of a new era.
Just wait till the new Source Guard come out and
yeah.
Okay. Well, guys, that finally brings to the end of the video. I just want to really thank Caleb so much for his time here. Caleb, thank you for the very smooth communication, the great vibes. We loved having you joining us. Ryan and I were both very excited that you agreed to come on our channel here. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. That was fun.
Yeah, let's definitely do this again sometime, and I wish you the best of luck against all your Stormcast battles in the future.
Yeah, I'm getting tired of getting beat by my 13-year-old son here. So,
yeah. I mean, you raise him well. That's a compliment for yourself. Every time you lose, that's partially your work there.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun. Love
Ryan,
this game.
Yeah. Ryan, also thank you to you for all of the calculation that you did. I do understand that I made your homework more difficult than before because it was pretty vague. I often asked you a question like, could you calculate this, while I wouldn't even understand how I would start calculating those things. So I'm very happy that you did those still.
Yeah, man. It's always fun. It's good to do.
And the last thanks I'll aim towards our viewers or listeners here. Thank you so much for sticking to till the end with us. More than 3 hours in now. If you liked it, please leave a like. Feel free to share it around. Liking and commenting really helps us get noticed by the algorithm and shows that you appreciate everything that we do. If you want to stay in touch, please do subscribe. I might actually do a Seraphon Warscroll breakdown in the future, but not as quickly as I will as I did for the Loomis stuff, because I just have to playtest many more units, to be honest. And don't forget, if you haven't already, you probably have, go check out Caleb's channel. Caleb, maybe you want to quickly shout out how they can find you.
Just search Caleb Hastings or Seraphon, or you'll find me somewhere, I'm sure. So yeah.
You're also in on Twitter or X, I guess.
Sometimes I barely post there, so
okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so Caleb Hastings for the YouTube channel, and there's good stuff there. So if you're hyped for Seraphon after watching our video, there's plenty more to go around on Caleb's channel.
That's right.
Okay, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next one. Bye-bye.
See you.
Hey, Caleb, thanks so much, man.